Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. His name was Naruto, and that was all he could remember about his past. He had been found on the shores of a continent, which he later found out was named the Earth Kingdom, and was nursed back to health by an elderly woman. She had helped him understand their language and taught him the history of their world. Naruto had then witnessed the village that had always loved the elderly woman turn on her just because she had come from another country, namely the Fire Nation. He was small back then, no older than 5 years old, but he had been forced to watch his only precious person being killed just because of where she came from. So, from then on, Naruto traveled through the Earth Kingdom in search of knowledge and to improve his fighting style, which he had discovered to be earthbending. He had wandered for years, facing death several times, before coming across a small city not touched by the war. There he found a new purpose: protecting the blind daughter of a nobleman, her being only a few years younger than her new guardian. At first Naruto had believed her to be just a little, helpless blind girl, but he should soon be proven wrong. That day came when she got lost in the nearby mountains and by accident discovered her own way to sea. Your only job was to protect her. How could you have let her sneak away if she was always supposed to be in your sight? Asked Lao Baifeng, the father of Naruto's charge, as he and his wife glared at said blonde-haired teenager. Naruto stood before them, his long spiky blonde hair kept in a low ponytail, dressed in loose robes that looked to be more suited to an airbender than an earthbender. The colors were a burnt orange color with black trimmings, and attached to his waist was a strange sword instead of the usually used hammers. So all in all, he didn't look much like the standard type of earthbender. Although with his blonde hair, blue eyes and whisker-like marks, Naruto seemed like a stranger in almost every part of the world. I will find her at once, Lord Baifeng, Naruto said, and, after a respectful bow, he left the main room in search of the 10-year-old girl. Naruto searched all of her hiding places, both in and out of the estate, and was now searching up in the mountains. Naruto knew the mountains like the back of his hand, mostly because he often went there to practice his own bending, but he feared a blind girl could easily end up lost or even killed up there. The last thing he wanted was to find the dead body of his little charge in some pit just because he allowed her to slip from his sight for 10 minutes. He had no idea how she had been able to do that in the first place. It was then that Naruto felt tremors coming from inside a cave, followed by the sound of a little girl screaming. In an instant, he shot into the cave, using his feet and earthbending skills to have some sort of vision in the dark, and before long, he found the blind girl. Naruto calmly knelt down at her side and found that she hadn't cried in pain but out of grief. Her blank eyes were wide open, tears sliding down her cheeks, and she backed away from him the moment she realized she wasn't alone. "Stay away from me," she screamed, not knowing who was in the dark with her. But Naruto simply reached forwards and placed his hand on her head. "Toph, relax," was all Naruto had to say, before the blind girl went from being as far from him as possible to burying her face in his chest. Naruto stayed there, holding his charge, and allowed her to cry as much as she needed. He understood that she wished to be treated like the other children instead of being treated like a glass doll. The last 3 years had allowed him to bond with the child, and she in turn began to open up to the companion she had never seen. Toph had always come to Naruto when she needed an outlet, but lately these moments had become rare, and even he had to face her angry side increasingly often. "I am so sorry," Toph cried, and Naruto pulled her close, hoping it would somehow stop her crying. "There's nothing to be sorry for. I may not understand what you go through each day, but I will never be angry with you. You live a much harder life than most of us, but because you still carry on, you are also stronger than any of us could ever hope to be," Naruto said, his voice echoing through the cave system, but despite his best efforts his words only seemed to make Toph cry harder. "I'm so scared. I am lost. Where am I?" she asked, but it sounded more like a plea for help, as Naruto moved his fingers through her black locks. "You're safe. The earth around you will always protect its children. Believe it, Toph. Wherever there is earth, she will protect you if you allow it," whispered Naruto, who could feel Toph's breathing calming down and her tears slowly stopped. "How can it protect me? It's not alive," she asked, her confusion muffling her grief for the moment. "Of course she is. Everything around you is alive and willing to protect you if you know how to ask." "Toph, would you like to know how to ask for her help?" Naruto inquired. Toph pulled away and turned her face towards his voice, looking up to him, dried tears now all that remained of her former mood. The strong, yet still fragile child nodded with a smile on her young face, and Naruto, in turn, wiped away her dried tears. "Then come and I will teach you. 3 years later, you're not my boss," screamed a now 13-year-old Toph Beifong at her longtime protector. "I never said that I was. I only stated that facing multiple earthbending masters in a tournament requires more thought than you are currently giving," stated Naruto. "So you think I'm not good enough?" she shouted, while glaring in his general direction. "No, I know you are skilled enough, but the fact remains that there is the possibility of you being hit. At the moment your body isn't strong enough to take a hit and keep fighting," Naruto said, keeping his temper in check. "You're treating me like my parents do," Toph retorted. "No, I'm treating you like a friend. I know it's hard to believe, but there is a difference between worrying and pampering," the blonde said, but still Toph glared at him. "I'm going tonight and I order you not to follow me," screamed Toph, not realizing that this was the first order she had ever given him, yet he still remained calm. "Very well, Ms. Beifong, I shall not follow you." Naruto continued to sit in the garden of the Beifong estate, not having moved since his charge, in her anger, ordered him not to follow her. For a moment, Naruto thought about at least going to the strange earthbending fight, if only to keep Toph alive, but she would never learn if she didn't experience the pain of making a mistake. So he waited for several hours, until suddenly Toph emerged from a hole that formed on the ground. Her uniform was torn and she seemed to be holding her left shoulder while trying not to show the pain she was obviously suffering. After her tirade earlier that evening, she didn't want to admit that he had been right, but still she felt bad for saying what she did. Toph had never said something like that to her protector, and now she was almost afraid to face him again, fearing to hear the disappointment in his voice. He had always been with her, teaching her, protecting her, but with her words she had all but spat in his face when he only tried to spare her the unnecessary pain. "How did it go?" was all he asked, his tone flat but his eyes filled with worry for her well-being. "I got hurt, okay. You happy now?" snapped Toph, hoping her temper would at least put anger in his voice instead of it just being devoid of emotion. "No, I'm not, let me see your arm," said Naruto, his tone never changing, but Toph just backed away from him. "Don't talk to me like that. At least be mad at me, I can deal with that, just stop sounding like you don't care," she screamed, her voice cracking somewhat, but Naruto just placed his hand on her injured shoulder. "Your muscles are bruised badly, hold still and I'll try to ease the pain," stated Naruto, now with some concern in his voice, making Toph feel even worse. "I didn't ask for help," she said, her voice low and tears forming on the sides of her blank eyes. "You'll never have to. It's my duty to care for you, and even if it wasn't, I have become fond of your company," said Naruto as he pressed some of the pressure points on her arms, and soon enough Toph couldn't feel the pain anymore. "You should be mad at me. I wish you were mad at me." "Why aren't you mad at me?" Toph asked as Naruto took her smaller hand and led her back to her room, taking caution as to not be seen by the guards. "Do you remember that day when you ran away? I promised never to be angry at you. And I always keep my word, you should know that. Now why don't you tell me what happened?" said Naruto, and so Toph began her tale. From what Naruto understood, she had allowed her past victories to cloud her judgment and underestimated her opponent. Apparently, the fighter was a child but was able to move around the field while making very few vibrations. Naruto could tell Toph was unnerved by the knowledge that someone could avoid her vision for extended periods of time. During her explanation, Toph tried to convince her protector to hold her like he used to do when they were younger. While he tried to talk her out of it, she moved into his arms anyway. "You know, others could perceive this the wrong way. You're almost a teenager, and I shouldn't hold you like this," commented Naruto, but he never received a response. When he looked down, Naruto saw that his charge had fallen asleep in his arms and, with a small sigh, carried her back to her room. Naruto allowed one of the female servants to change Toph's clothes before he placed her in her bed and covered her up. Naruto stood there for a moment, contemplating just how much she had changed his life, before he heard a small cough coming from the doorway. When he turned around, he was greeted to the sight of Toph's mother, Poppy Beifong, as she was smiling at him of all things. "Lady Beifong, I didn't hear you arrive." Naruto made a small bow while the older woman silently walked into the room. "She's never this peaceful when Lao or I tuck her in. You must have a special secret," commented Poppy, but Naruto just looked at the ground out of respect. I'm sure she's just tired from today's activities. She exerts herself more than she would like to admit, said Naruto as Poppy ran her hand through her daughter's hair. You've been with us for such a long time, Naruto. You protected Toph every day for all those years. I'm glad I have someone who I can trust with my daughter's well-being. That's why I'm here to warn you that my husband has paid a group of earthbenders to kill you while blaming you for trying to kidnap our daughter. Naruto, do you understand what I'm telling you? Poppy asked, not noticing her daughter's fists clench. With all due respect, I took an oath to protect your daughter and I would never forgive myself if I just left, said Naruto, his tone still completely calm, but Poppy was becoming erratic. They're going to kill you if you don't leave, and if you get killed, Toph is surely going to blame herself for it. All because my husband believes you are no longer best fit for the job after you let our daughter sneak away 3 years ago. Also, he fears what kind of problems could arise once you both hit puberty. He already sees how Toph depends on you and how you seem so much more important to her than we are. He hopes that by killing you, he can lay her protection back into the hands of normal, uncaring mercenaries, who keep her protected and timid. Also, he thinks that by removing you from her life, she would be so distraught that she would come back to him, seeking solace in the last persons precious to her. She all but yelled, tears of anger forming, but her entire body relaxed when Naruto placed his hand on her shoulder. Gone was the indifference, and now in its place was a smile so sincere that she would have believed him if he said the Fire Nation were running around in dresses with clown's makeup. Naruto's blue eyes seemed to calm her down to her very soul, and the room's aura became comforting. Worry not for my health or that of your daughters. She is much stronger than you might think, and it will take more than some earthbenders to keep me from fulfilling my duty to her, Naruto said, his voice sending soothing waves through her body. Poppy could only nod before she found herself in her bed besides her accursed husband. Damn you, Lao, damn you, was her last thought before she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Later that night, Naruto found himself once again walking through the mountains. The same mountains where he found Toph after she ran away a few years ago. However, this time he didn't come here to save a life but to minimize casualties. In fact, his would-be assassins were currently planning to crush him with several large boulders. When the rocks began to fall, Naruto simply stopped walking before looking up at the rather large rock only seconds away from crushing him. Naruto instantly brought his fist up and, with one strong punch, broke the boulder into several pieces. He then slammed his fists into the side of the mountain, causing cracks to run up its side before it reached the cliff his attackers stood upon and caused it to collapse. After the dust of the following landslide settled, several groans could be heard from beneath the rubble, and several assailants had entire portions of their bodies crushed under rock. The lucky ones were dead within seconds, while the unlucky ones had to suffer the pain of broken limbs and crushed organs. Therefore, without anything trying to kill him at the moment, Naruto walked over to the closest living earthbender and picked him up by his throat. All the while, Naruto's kind smile never left his face. Now tell me, how many more of you are there? Next day, 7 a.m. Toph, it's time to wake up, Naruto said, his eyes shining even brighter in the morning light, just as Toph's own blind eyes opened. What time is it? The little girl asked while trying to stifle a yawn, as Naruto did his best to wrap up her morning bed head in her usual bun. 7 a.m. and that's past your usual wake-up time. I'll send in a servant, so you can get dressed, and then we can go for a walk around the gardens, he said, but that was just their code word meaning he would train her in earthbending. Toph was out of bed in an instant. What are we waiting for? Toph half yelled, with clear excitement in her voice and her eyes almost glistening. A few minutes later, Naruto was once again leading the blind girl out into the gardens. She could see in her own way, but she liked holding her protector's hand. Before she learned how to use her bending skill to see, she had relied on him to guide her around. He had been her eyes, and without his guidance she would have been completely blind. So what are we going to do today? Make a hole and cover it up so the guards fall in it? Or maybe make a giant statue in my honor? Asked Toph, but Naruto shook his head on both ideas. Nope, today we're going to enjoy the outside. Then we make a hole, he replied, mischief in his eyes, making Toph's smile widen even more. Sweetness, was all Toph said as she allowed herself to walk closer to Naruto, making said blonde raise an eyebrow before dismissing it as insignificant. Naruto, someone is inside the garden. Naruto had planned out the perfect day for Toph and himself. They were going to relax in the garden, Maybe pull a prank or two on the guards. Then he would make lunch for her and afterwards they would spend the rest of the day enjoying each other's company. But as always things had to go different than planned and now Naruto was sitting next to Toph, at the formal dinner table of the Bifrongs, with the avatar of all people. Needless to say, it was a very tense atmosphere and if Toph wasn't blind, Naruto was sure she would be sending a death glare right at the avatar's tattooed head. He could have done it for her but he was just too much of a nice person and as his charge's ire seemed to come mostly from her bad experience during their fight in that unrefined earthbending tournament he didn't want to risk questions about his sudden change in behavior towards complete strangers, lest he gave away hints at Toph's nightly activities. Avatar Aang, I am honored to have you as a guest in my home. If you don't mind me asking, what are your plans for ending the war? Lao asked, to which Naruto had to resist the urge to roll his eyes. Well, I'd like to end the war by the end of summer but I still need an earthbending teacher, replied Aang, who was looking pointedly at Toph, making her try to crush his foot with earthbending. Luckily, Naruto stopped her just before she could enact her obvious plan. Well, Master Yu is the finest earthbending teacher in the land. He's been teaching Toph since she was little, Lao praised, which caused Naruto to subtly roll his eyes. Then she must already be a great earthbender, Aang hinted, still not being subtle in the slightest, and with that Naruto allowed Toph to shoot a rock right into the avatar's foot. Aang nearly jumped out of his seat when the piece of rock hit his foot, to which Toph didn't react in the slightest, still acting like the sweet, innocent girl that Naruto knew she wasn't. This also caused her father to exchange looks between the opposite benders and at that moment, Naruto knew that Lao would find out about Toph. Luckily the greedy earthbending master on the other end of the table chose this exact moment to speak up for the first time. Toph is still learning the basics, said Yu, sounding like he wanted to reassure Lao. Yes, and sadly her blindness will prevent her from ever becoming a true master of the art. Lao agreed, the tone in his voice setting Naruto on guard. He needed to get Toph out of the room as fast as possible or he feared something troubling might happen. Lord Bifong, I had hoped to continue the walk through the garden your daughter and I were planning. We were interrupted before by the avatar's sudden appearance and Toph was really excited about exploring the south side of the garden. Naruto pled, hoping to defuse the situation before it escalated to the entire estate being reduced to rubble. Well, it's unusual for the host's family to leave during dinner, but Toph doesn't get as much time outside as she used to, so we shall make an exception for her, Lao admitted, but Naruto could see a strange glint in the man's eyes and with his previous experience it instantly put him on edge. So Naruto gently took Toph's hand and led her away from the strange group of people still sitting at the table. Once out of earshot, Toph suddenly buried her face in Naruto's robes and screamed as loud as she could. Naruto stayed like that for a moment, allowing Toph to vent her frustration, before the little earthbender grabbed his hand and practically dragged him out of the house. Stupid Twinkle Toes avatar, Toph continued to rant to herself the entire time she was dragging Naruto. Toph, relax, I can hear your heart beating even from here, demanded Naruto as both earthbenders arrived in the middle of the garden. Toph released her death grip on her protector's hand before slamming her small hand into a wall. Instantly several cracks formed all over it from the point of impact and it looked like a gust of wind would be enough for it to collapse completely. Naruto, never having seen Toph this worked up, slowly walked over to her and allowed his very presence to calm her. Over all the years he had been with her, Naruto knew that just being around him could sometimes calm the raging girl down, if only just a little. It's not a good idea to be around me right now, said Toph as she made a chair of earth rise from the ground for her to sit upon. I know, was Naruto's only response as he sat down beside her, using his fingers to place a stray lock of hair behind her ear in a further attempt to calm her. Why does he keep trying to force me? I mean, if I say no then doesn't he understand that I mean no? Asked Toph, as she listened closely to Naruto's steady heartbeat. That wonderful sound had made her drift off to sleep on more than one occasion. If he knew more about you and the situation you are in, he would probably understand. However, being the Avatar has allowed him to get most of what he needs and everyone wants him to end the war as soon as possible. So in the end, he doesn't really know any better, explained Naruto as Toph further relaxed, by resting her head up against his arm and taking a deep breath. So someone needs to bring him back down to earth? Can I do it literally? Toph joked, making Naruto laugh alongside her. Well, if you agree to train him, then you have a reason to put him through the grinder and can even call it training, Naruto teased. A momentary of silence fell over the two earthbenders, something that seemed to happen quite often, and it allowed their enhanced hearing to pick up on things that would be impossible to hear. Like the sound of two things beating together. Thump, 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 boom, thump. In that last moment, both Naruto and Toph heard the sound of multiple people approaching very quickly. This was followed by the wall next to them exploding in their direction, which caused Naruto to use his own body to shield Toph. Not expecting the attack at all, Naruto was caught off guard when a large chunk of earth went flying at him. Luckily, his reflexes kicked in and he kicked the rock so hard it turned to dust. "You're going to pay for what you did to our friends, you bastard," said a rather deep voice, which Naruto recognized all too well. "Shin Fu, it has been a while," stated Naruto, as the smoke cleared to reveal most of the people Toph had beaten that evening in the earthbending tournament. "You mean since you cheated me out of my money, you little brat," spat Shin, to which Naruto only rolled his eyes. "That was a long time ago, now what do you want with me?" asked Naruto, making sure to place Toph behind him just so she could watch for anyone trying to sneak up behind them. "I'm not here for you, this time, I'm here for the girl. She and that other kid cost me quite some money and I plan to collect," Shin said, a rather too confident grin on his rough face. "I won't let you touch her," the blonde said, his smile still not leaving his face. "You can't stop me," and with that said, two sleeping darts impaled themselves into his arms and a large metal cage slammed down around Toph. "When you wake up, come down to the tournament grounds with my money. If you don't show up, I promise I'm going to bury that girl alive in that metal cage just to be sure," Shin spat just before everything went black for Naruto. Naruto's dream. Everything was pitch black, he couldn't even see 3 inches in front of him. There was no ground beneath his feet or even air to fill his lungs. It was emptiness, but at the same time, Naruto knew that something was there. Suddenly, out of the blackness, there was a small green light. To him the light felt warm, inviting even. "In the era before the Avatar, we bent not the elements but the energy within ourselves," a booming voice said, before Naruto was suddenly forced back to the waking world. Real world. Naruto woke up to the feeling of being in an overly soft bed and, when he opened his eyes, he found Poppy Baifong, the Avatar and his group, and several guards, all surrounding him. His first reaction would have been to explain what had happened, however Toph was currently in the hands of Shin Fu and that took priority. So with a twitch of his hand, all the guards were swallowed halfway into the ground and Naruto took off out of the room. He was immediately pursued by the Avatar's team and Toph's parents. Naruto found it challenging to dodge blasts of air and whips of water, but once he was outside he took off like a bat out of hell. For unlike other earthbenders, Naruto didn't fight with just brute strength, but during his travels through the Earth Kingdom, he studied little bits of other bending styles and sought for ways to implement them into his own style. Right now, Naruto manipulated the earth like a waterbender would and traveled across the land faster than the best ostrich horse. However, he never noticed the small green glow that his eyes and whisper marks gave off, nor did the Avatar following on his glider notice his own eyes and tattoos glow ever so slightly. 5 minutes later, Earth Rumble V Arena. To say Naruto made an entrance would be like saying the Avatar was a decent bender, the underestimation of the century. So when the ceiling of the cave was suddenly ripped open, there were many people who screamed in surprise. Not to mention that the entire arena shook when Naruto's smaller form collided with it. When the dust settled, Naruto noticed that the arena stands, save for the first few rows, were completely full of roaring fans, who no doubt thought this was some big act put on by Shin. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever 7-on-1 match of Earth Rumble V. Our challenger has agreed to face us for the right to save the legendary Blind Bandit. Shin yelled, drawing more cheers from the audience just as the Avatar and the Baifong family entered the stadium. "Shin, I'm giving you one last chance to release her. If you don't, I can guarantee that none of you will walk away from this unharmed," Naruto promised, while still keeping that small smile on his face, hoping it would be enough to avoid a fight and that Shin hadn't gone insane from too many rocks to the head. A hint of doubt seemed to enter the eyes of the kidnapper and he slowly made his way towards his opponent. Naruto hoped to hand over the keys to the locks on Toph's cage. But as soon as the bulky man was close enough, a demented glint entered his eyes and he whispered barely loud enough for Naruto to hear it. "Sorry, but this isn't just for some personal payback. That girl's old man paid me a lot of money to make sure you don't walk out of here alive. And if I'm able to kill 2 little earthbenders with 1 stone." Shin trailed off, but his intentions were clear as day. And with that, something happened that Toph, who hung in her cage above the ground, never thought she would experience. The previously calm beat of Naruto's heart sped up for a few moments before slowing way down, becoming deadly calm. His kind aura turned murderous and, unseen by her, for the first time since the two met, he stopped smiling. That was also the moment when the bell to fight rang and Shin jumped back to wait behind his goons. The first to attack was an earthbender that went by the title, the Gopher, and he sure did live up to his name. When he came shooting up out of the ground, trying to tackle Naruto, he was met by the back of a foot. Naruto's axe kick was so powerful that when the Gopher's head hit the ground cracked like a spider web. "I warned you." Neutral Jing was the true way of the earthbender, not attacking with overwhelming power, or even evading with the ability to move earth. No, the way to truly earthbend was to wait and listen. Before the 100-Year War, many earthbenders had known this, but over the years, they grew tired of waiting and began to attack like by using positive Jing. They attacked without listening, and it was because of this they had been on the losing side of the war for the last 100 years. Naruto had first been like this, then after an incident, he learned to wait and listen for the right time to strike. That is how he knew when to drop his axe kick on one of the earthbenders, who had stolen Toph and drugged him. He was angry that he had let his guard down enough for this situation to happen. The anger was expressed by the massive spider web crack that formed from the man's head hitting solid rock. Naruto had only ever felt this angry the time that poor old woman was killed for simply being born of a different culture. Riotous anger coursed through his veins, lighting his body on fire, and all he could see was the red haze of anger. However, even with all his rage, Naruto didn't even take a single step towards his opponents. He knew that if he attacked first, then he would be attacking on their terms, which alone would put him at an even greater disadvantage than he was already at. Hopefully his remaining opponents would be ignorant enough to attack him first, and if they didn't, then he would have to take him down, roared Shin, as his minions charged Naruto, but Shin himself stayed behind. Just like him to let others do the fighting for him, thought Naruto as a massive earthbender, named Hippo, came right for him. Naruto continued to stand completely still. Then, at the last possible second, Naruto slammed his foot into the ground. The result was an 8-foot deep and 6-foot wide, appearing right under the charging monstrosity. Moments later, Hippo was completely in the hole, with only his head showing. The last thing Hippo saw was Naruto's foot coming down on his face. Next, Naruto asked menacingly, his azure eyes glowing a slight emerald, making his eyes appear to be cyan instead of azure. "Ha!" screamed a mask-wearing earthbender, who was currently swinging at Naruto, on a rope attacked to what's left of the ceiling, with a good-sized rock in his hand. As he swung lower to the ground, the masked earthbender got ready to smash his rock right into the back of Naruto's head. What he didn't expect was for Naruto to suddenly turn and smash his foot into his face. Combined with the momentum he had from swing, and suddenly being stopped cold, the masked earthbender knew his nose was broken along with his front teeth. That and his mask had also been completely destroyed. However, he still had enough strength to get back up, only for Naruto to roundhouse kick him with enough force to send him flying out of the ring. Sadly, this gave Fire Nation Man the chance to hit Naruto in the back with a rock. Slightly stunned from the attack, Naruto was unable to block the sudden force of Headhunter slamming a rock into Naruto's right arm. "What's wrong, Naruto? Not as good as you thought you were?" asked Shin, who was greatly enjoying the sight of Naruto being attacked by his remaining minions. That comment made Naruto's blood boil even more than it already was, so in response he grabbed Headhunter by the back of his head and slammed his knee multiple times into the face paint-wearing earthbender. Seeing his comrade in trouble, and not wanting to face the angry blonde-haired earthbend alone, Fire Nation Man sent another rock at Naruto. Acting out of pure reflex, Naruto moved Headhunter in the way of the rock before jumping out of the way. The result was the masked earthbender being thrown out of the ring. "The boulder will crush your puny skull," cried the muscular earthbender as he charged Naruto head-on. With amazing grace, almost making it seem like he was an airbender, Naruto slipped under Boulder's punch before delivering multiple jabs to his defenseless side. Now, with the speed the punches were thrown, people would think it wouldn't do much damage. Now imagine their surprise when Boulder screamed, at the top of his lungs, before collapsing to the ground. Naruto had targeted the weak points of the Boulder's ribs and broken all of them on his right side. "Shin, I'm coming for you," Naruto said menacingly, the glow in his eyes growing brighter. "You won't even get close," said Shin, hoping that Fire Nation Man would be able to take down this little monster, but when he turned, Shin saw Fire Nation Man running out of the rain. "As you were saying?" Naruto asked, with an insult hidden in there somewhere. "Looks like I have to do everything myself," sighed Shin, before he stomped the ground and a pair of war hammers shot up into his awaiting hands. To this the surrounding crowd cheered with excitement, not ever seeing one child tear his way through experienced earthbenders, not able to wait for the grand conclusion between the final fighters. Naruto paused for a moment, considering drawing his own weapon, before an idea formed in his head. Perhaps now would be the proper time to test what he had been studying and training for the past couple years. Yes, now would be the perfect time. "What's with the smile? Finally realized you don't stand a chance," taunted Shin, but it was really to hide his nervousness of fighting someone clearly more skilled than himself. "I've got a gift for you, Shin, and sadly you aren't going to enjoy it." There was a tone in Naruto's voice that made the people that knew him think he was a completely different person. In fact, his attacks had been far more aggressive than he normally used, and he hadn't smiled since the fight had begun. This wasn't the person who had protected Toph for the last few years, and it made Poppy sad to see such a change in the once happy teenager. "Are you happy now?" Poppy thought, somehow thinking her husband could hear her thoughts. The look on Lao's face had gone from confident, at the beginning of the match, to grim when he saw all the men he hired taken down like insects. If this kept up, then he feared he would have to take matters into his own hands, and that would also put his own precious life in danger. He wanted Toph back to her usual timid self, but if Naruto survived there would be no chance of that ever happening. "Why is your heart angry, Naruto?" Toph asked, from within her cage, as she tried to block out everything but Naruto's heartbeat. It was so loud, beating so fast, and she hated it. It was as if drums were pounding in her head and she wanted nothing more than to make it go back to being slow and steady. "Toph?" Naruto asked himself, barely catching her words with his enhanced hearing. Her voice seemed to reach through the red haze of his anger and stab him right in his soul. That wasn't the voice of the headstrong, self-proclaimed, greatest earthbender in the world. That voice belonged to the timid Toph Beifong that he had met all those years ago. It had been when she was scared of every little sound, thinking it was something coming to hurt her. She had been so scared back then, and Naruto had helped her stop. "Come on, I don't have all day," Shin yelled, but in reality, the longer Naruto waited the more he believed he had a chance of winning. That is when it hit him, he wasn't supposed to fight angry. No, that wasn't right. He made a promise to never fight out of anger, and he had just broken that promise. That sweet old woman had told him how fighting out of anger was never the way to truly fight, and that he could inadvertently cause those he cared about pain. So, after taking a deep breath, Naruto said, "Sorry Shin, I didn't mean to fight in anger, but don't worry, I'm calm now so we can get to the main event," before allowing a small smile to slip back onto his face. He had pictured one of the times he and Toph had snuck out of the estate to practice their earthbending. It had been one of his happiest memories with his little charge, and it always seemed to make him smile. She had been so frustrated with trying to expand her sai that she accidentally stomped down too hard on the ground. The result was her entire leg getting stuck in the ground and Naruto being forced to help her get free. Man, she was probably a better earthbender than him by now. "Fight, fight, fight," the crowd chanted, no longer wanted them to banter and just stand there talking. "My fans want a fight, but that would require both sides having an equal chance of winning," said Shin, before he slammed his hammers into the ground, causing earth spikes to shoot up right under Naruto. Naruto, in turn, used one of the spikes to launch himself high into the air. Shin believed Naruto was going to attack him from above, but imagine his surprise when Naruto landed on top of Toph's cage. "Sorry I took so long, Toph," Naruto apologized before he ripped a piece of earth out of his foot, which had been broken off when Naruto used it to get to his current destination. "Just get me out of here," Toph said, trying to sound as tough as she could. Naruto was about to earthbend the rock, to break the lock on Toph's metal cage, only for a much larger rock to slam into the cage. When Naruto looked down, he saw Shin already launching an even bigger piece of earth at the metal cage. Being prepared for this one, Naruto swiftly destroyed the rock with a back kick, all before he jammed the smaller rock into the lock's keyhole. "Toph, do you trust me?" Naruto asked as he deflected another boulder from Shin. "Without a doubt," was Toph's response. With that, Naruto made the small rock expand inside the lock, but that also caused the bottom of the metal cage to open. Hooking his feet in between the metal bars, Naruto swung down and grabbed Toph before she even got half a foot from her former cage. This was also the moment that one of Shin's projectiles slammed into Naruto, causing him to lose his grip on the cage. Knowing they were falling, Naruto positioned himself so he would hit the ground first and use his own body to cushion Toph's smaller body. When they finally did hit the ground, Naruto could have sworn he heard something in his back crack. "Who's the better earthbender now?" taunted Shin, letting down his guard, only for a fist-sized rock to hit him in the face. "That would be me," yelled Toph, who had managed to get up off of Naruto and attack her kidnapper. "Why you little?" Shin began, only to have another rock hit him in his lower region. Finally, Toph summoned a human-sized boulder and used it to send Shin flying out of the ring. This was the last thing Naruto saw before everything went black. Baifeng Estate. 2 hours later. "Toph, I'm sure you'll be fine, but you need your rest," said Poppy to her daughter, while Toph continued to sit by Naruto's prone body. "What if he wakes up? What if he's still hurt and we just don't know it?" Toph said as she took Naruto's hand, not wanting to let go for even a second. That nice water tribe girl made sure he was completely healed, and what would Naruto say if he saw you like this? Poppy asked, gently pulling her blind daughter away from her protector. "He'd say I shouldn't be up so late and that I'll be cranky if I don't get enough sleep," Toph whispered as her grip on Naruto's hand slipped. "Don't worry, he'll still be here in the morning," Poppy whispered before leading her depressed daughter out of the room. What she didn't know was that Lao snuck into the room, not 10 minutes later, and in his hand was a curved dagger. He was dressed in a pitch-black outfit, no doubt to make anyone who saw him fleeing think it was just some assassin, and he had a very demented glint in his eyes. This was a man willing to murder to get what he wants. Why couldn't you just die like any other person? Can you even hear me?" Lao asked, an almost desperate look in his eyes as he raised the gleaming blade up and brought it down. Naruto's eyes shot open as the sharp blade pierced his chest, just missing his ear by half an inch. Out of both reflex and pain, Naruto made his attacker sink into the ground all the way up to his neck. It was also at this moment that the occupants of the estate came running into the room, only to find Lao screaming his head off and Naruto collapsed on the ground with a knife sticking out of his chest. As the blackness once again began to consume him, Naruto could see Toph's worried expression. "Naruto, why does my heart hurt so much?" Naruto asked, as he gently touched his chest, but when his hand away, he saw red liquid. "Human, you really have forgotten who you are. You should be grateful that I'm still here to save you, partner," a voice boomed from every direction, before bright orange energy surrounded his entire body. Suddenly, green energy sprung up from Naruto's stab wound and began to fight the bright orange energy. The battle of the two energies caused unimaginable pain to tear its way through Naruto's entire being. Every cell in his body vibrated in agony and all he could do was scream as loud as if vocal cords allowed him to. "Ha! So they prepared for our meeting and set up a defense. Don't worry, this will only hurt a little and what comes next, more so," the voice boomed again and mere seconds later, Naruto's skin began to peel away from his body to reveal a mass of red and black energy. As this process went on, Naruto's eyes glowed a demonic red and his cries of pain became roars of anger. What was once a simple 15-year-old boy had become, what looked to be, a creature from the darkest corners of the spirit world. As he thrashed around, Naruto could hear the sound of a little girl crying and it only seemed to make him more determined to break free from whatever this strange place was. "Yes, human, lose control and feed me more," roared the voice before a single bright blue dot appeared right where Naruto's heart was. That dot then proceeded to grow until Naruto's entire body was glowing blue instead of red and black. With that, The injury next to Naruto's heart healed and his body returned to its normal form. So Naruto just continued to float in this ominous voice, unaware of the gigantic pair of red slit eyes watching him from above. He did, however, soon find out who those eyes belonged to when a massive black tentacle shot out of the darkness and wrapped itself around Naruto. And with that, Naruto sprung awake to the awaiting real world. The Avatars group, and Toph, all just staring at him, greeted him. That is also when he realized that he was in some type of massive saddle and that they were currently flying through the air. "Wow, Katara, remind me to have you never try and heal me," commented Sokka as they all just continued to stare at Naruto. "Sokka, I never even got the chance to begin healing him," was Katara's response and, with all the staring coming his way, Naruto finally began to get irritated. "Why are you all staring at me?" Naruto asked, as his head grew dramatically larger and turned almost completely red. "Your heart stopped beating," Toph said, her voice barely above that of a whisper, causing Naruto's gaze to soften and his momentary anger to slip away. The rest of their short trip was carried out in relative silence, with Naruto spending most of the time allowing Toph to sleep up against him. Apparently, he had been knocked out for the past 3 days and Toph had been awake for about just as long. Aang informed him that Lao had been arrested for trying to kill Naruto and a number of illegal things, and so Poppy now headed the Beifong family. "Hey, you guys picked a good campsite. The grass is so soft," commented Toph as she jumped off Appa and prepared to get some rest for the night. "Toph, that's not grass, I believe Appa is shedding," said Naruto as he climbed off the sky bison and prepared to help set up the camp. "Ew, grouse," Katara said, trying to walk out of the pile of bison hair that had formed around them. "It's not grouse, it's just a natural part of spring, and Appa gets a new coat," Aang said, wanting to put in a few words of defense for his longtime friend. "We should get him cleaned off early tomorrow. Especially if that Prince Zuko is still tracking Aang," said Naruto as he earth-bended just enough rock tents for the 5 of them. "Well, at least that will save us time on setting up our own tents. Man, we should have had an earth-bender with us from the start," said Sokka as he prepared to start the fire pit. "Toph, come help me set a few traps for anyone who might be following us," requested Naruto before he began to walk into the surrounding woods, not really giving Toph a chance to decline. So with an irritated grunt, Toph followed her protector into the woods, unaware of the 3 most dangerous women in the world tracking them. "Toph, what has been bothering you?" Naruto asked as he, and Toph, loosened the ground around the camp so that anything too heavy would sink into a 5-foot deep hole. "I don't get why you were helping them. We can take care of ourselves," was Toph's answer before she raised the earth so there was only one entrance to the camp, which was a trap, and so only Appa could fly them out. "I'm sure we can, but, to be fair, we also owe them for allowing us to ride Appa and we don't seem like people just using them to see the world. So, in other words, we're being polite," was Naruto's response, but, judging by Toph's silence, she did not fully agree. That's when Naruto felt the vibrations of something large and fast heading their way. It was unlike anything Naruto had ever felt during his travels, and he never did like the unknown. The unknown always seemed to have some way of turning an ordinary day into a living hell. "We should warn the others and get ready to travel if need be," suggested Naruto. "What do you think it is?" asked Toph, having felt the vibrations only a few moments before Naruto. "A machine of some kind, most likely Fire Nation judging from the large amount of black smoke, and there's no doubt in my mind that they're tracking us," said Naruto as both he and Toph raced back to the main camp area. "Hey guys, you made it back just in time to eat," said Aang, waving over to the 2 newest members of their little gang. "Food can wait, we need to leave," said Naruto, who could feel the vibrations getting dangerously close. "Why?" asked Sokka, who was about to dig into a soup of some kind. "Because of that," Naruto stated, pointing behind him to the large amount of smoke only a mile away. Sure enough, a few minutes later, Appa took to the sky with all 5 passengers secured on his back. His short nap gave him enough energy to fly for a few more hours, but after that, he would need to rest again. This also gave the group a moment to get in a 3-hour nap, before being awoken by Appa hitting the ground with a tired grunt. "Looks like Appa flew himself a little too hard," said Aang, who peeked down to see Appa sound asleep. "The walls and trap Toph and I made should have slowed them down for at least an hour or 2. You guys get some rest while I go make some traps for this area," Naruto said before leaping out of Appa's saddle and onto the ground. From there Naruto walked about a mile out, already seeing the black smoke heading their way again, and made a few more sinkholes. He managed to make the sinkholes random so they couldn't predict where they were at, but that also took more time than he necessarily wanted to spend. Naruto couldn't help the sigh that escaped his lips when he saw the Fire Nation machine stop just a quarter mile from him. I never did like not knowing who I was fighting, Naruto thought to himself as one of the machine's large doors opened and out came three women, riding very mean-looking mongoose dragons. Hey, he doesn't look like the Avatar, Naruto heard one of the girls say, in a rather energetic tone, but he was also preparing to defend himself if they attacked. Tai Li, have I ever said how great you are at stating the obvious? Asked another one of the women, but this one seemed to be a polar opposite of Tai Li. Thanks Mei, you're such a good friend, Tai Li said, clearly not understanding that it was meant to be an insult. Take him down and question him. Even if he isn't one of the Avatar's friends, he might have seen what direction they went, said the third, and final, girl, but there was something about her that seemed to put Naruto on edge. What's wrong Naruto? It isn't like you to just stand around, there was that voice again. What the hell? Naruto thought, before something seemed to click inside his head and his eyes sharpened drastically. Naruto felt as if his entire state of mind had suddenly switched from a gentle earth bender to that of an experienced warrior and, if that was not enough, Naruto's eyes turned from bright blue to glowing crimson. The green energy from before seemed to try and suppress whatever was happening to Naruto, but the red energy just suppressed it, as if it was nothing but an ant. Welcome back my avatar, that voice said again. No, that voice had a name. Vaatu? Naruto thought, as a completely different life flashed before his eyes, and it was then that he remembered. Take him down. The one girl yelled as her two partners charged on their mongoose dragons, but Naruto just stood completely still. Then, with strength resembling that of a mighty lion turtle, Naruto slammed his foot onto the ground, and the result was nothing to scoff at. The very ground erupted in a forest of vicious black earth spikes, which not only destroyed the strange metal transport but also nearly killed the three Fire Nation women. Then, if that wasn't enough, black fire erupted from Naruto's mouth, making some believe he was a dragon in human form, and if not for already being a large distance away, the three women would have been burned alive. Large blasts of dark gray air then shot through the burning spike-covered field, completely extinguishing the fire and even blowing some of the spikes right out of the ground. Finally, with a monstrous-like roar, Naruto raised up his hand and seemed to call purple water out of the very air itself before flooding the area. All of this energy being used seemed to make Naruto weak, and that allowed the green energy to suppress Kurama and this new Naruto. With nothing else, Naruto felt his body about to give out and was left with only one option. He slammed his foot onto the ground and prayed that Toph was listening. Naruto's vision. You are powerful for a human, hatred is seated deep within your soul, and it delights me that such strong malevolence still exists in beings besides myself. Yes, you will do nicely, Vaatu said, as he looked down at the sleeping blonde human, seeing what magnificent destruction he could cause through such a person. If Rava can have her own human pet, then so can I. You are powerful for a human, hatred is seated deep within your soul, and it delights me that such strong malevolence still exists in beings besides myself. Yes, you will do nicely, Vaatu said, as he looked down at the sleeping blonde human, seeing what magnificent destruction he could cause through such a person. If Rava can have her own human pet, then so can I, said Vaatu as one of his black and red appendages reached down and actually entered the boy's body, just like when a spirit would take over a human. Vaatu expected a relatively easy corruption process, but what he got was pain like he had never known and a piece of his power ripped from him. Vaatu then noticed that bubbly red energy seemed to be oozing out of the boy's body, and that, whatever this thing was, it was the source of the malevolence. Normally, any sort of negative emotion would almost instantly bond with his own, but this one seemed to want the boy for itself. Not even your darkness can outmatch mine, no matter how strong you may be, Vaatu spat before he, himself, dove completely into the boy, just to make sure the job was done correctly this time. This was a mistake. The moment Vaatu entered the boy's soul, a massive and strange-looking fox that was at least the size of a full-grown lion turtle greeted him. The rage coming off the creature was so potent that a red haze had formed around them. This only made Vaatu more determined to claim this boy as his avatar and, by extension, control this massive beast. "Leave, spirit. This boy is under my protection," the beast growled, its voice shaking the stone walls and its anger making the water below boil. "I don't seek to harm this human. I only want an avatar to even myself with my counterpart Rava," said Vaatu, only for a large blast of red energy to explode from the fox's mouth and nearly vaporize the spirit of chaos. "You will do nothing to him. I know you seek to use him and I will not allow it." The fox roared, before firing another blast of energy at Vaatu, but this time he was prepared for it. Vaatu used his much smaller, and more flexible, form to slip around the large beam of energy, only to come face to face with an even bigger ball of energy. This energy was so powerful that Vaatu doubted nothing short of a god could stand a chance against it. Not to say he wasn't going to try, but it just wasn't looking for him, and all he had to do was just barely corrupt the boy. Yes, such a powerful weapon at his disposal will ensure his victory over Rava. "The human will be mine," Vaatu yelled as the red of his body turned to purple and a beam of black and purple energy shot out of his face. Normally Vaatu's beams are powerful enough to destroy anything in its path. This time it was a different story. No matter how much power he seemed to pack into his beam, the massive ball, of highly condensed energy, just seemed to plow through it as if it wasn't even there. Seeing no way to overpower the energy ball, Vaatu chose to stop his attack and instead avoid the attack altogether. "You will not claim him." Location: somewhere in the Earth Kingdom. Time: 2 hours later. "Hey, he's waking up," said the familiar voice of Sokka, as Naruto slowly opened his bright blue eyes, only to have the sun make them shut. "Naruto, how are you feeling?" asked Katara, ready to heal any physical injuries he might have sustained. "My head feels like a mountain landed on it," was Naruto's answer while he slowly sat up and reopened his eyes. Naruto once again found himself on the back of Aang's flying bison, several hundred feet in the air. Considering that they were above the clouds, Naruto found himself suddenly missing the safety of the ground and really wishing he could at least see it. Although, Naruto was relieved to find he wasn't the only one who seemed to hate being away from the ground. "Can we land now?" Toph asked as he held onto the saddle for dear life. "Sorry Toph, but I just want to make sure they can't track us anymore," said Aang, also making Naruto wonder just what happened when he was in Dreamland. "Would anyone mind filling me in on what happened?" Naruto asked as he crawled over to Toph, very slowly, and allowed her to hand onto him instead of the saddle. "Oh, nothing big, just a bunch of crazy women attacking us, Aang and Toph getting into a fight. Oh, and we ran into Zuko again," said Sokka as if it was just an everyday thing for them, which it most likely was. To this Katara slapped Sokka on the back of his head and gave him a glare only a woman can give. Meanwhile Toph had, once again, drifted off to sleep, which made Naruto wonder why she had been doing that lately. It had stated when he first woke up after that strange dream of his, or had she been doing it because her father had nearly killed him? Either way, Naruto had noticed her growing attachment to him and, for once, he didn't know what to do about it. Now with all the strange things happening to him, it could become very dangerous for Toph to be around him. "Naruto, can I ask you something?" asked Aang, catching Naruto's attention if only for a moment. "Yes Aang? When we found you, after fighting those girls, I felt something dark in the area. The landscape was torn up by weird variations of the four elements, which left a bad feeling in the air. Do you know what happened?" asked Aang, while Naruto froze for a moment and considered what his next words would be. So, with as straight a face as he could manage, Naruto said, "Sorry Aang, but I don't remember anything after those girls showing up in their strange machine." "Oh okay, but if you think of anything let me know," said Aang before he went back to piloting Appa, and Naruto closed his eyes to rest some more. Naruto's dream. "Remember Naruto, it was I who saved you in your time of need," said the all but destroyed form of Vaatu, as a slightly older looking Naruto stood above him. This Naruto did not look like the kind one that was having this dream. This Naruto didn't have an aura of happiness, and this Naruto showed mercy to none. Standing 6 feet tall with long wild blonde hair, red eyes in a sea of black, and covered in armor not used in ages, Naruto looked to be a god among men. Every dark emotion could be seen in his eyes, from the fire of rage, the sadness of 1,000 weeping angles, and a lust for anything and everything in sight. "Yes I remember how you gave me the power only one other had, and for that I thank you." However, you would undo everything I've worked so hard to create, Naruto said, his voice echoed by the screams of a million damned souls. That day, I should have killed you when I had the chance, Vato hissed, his own anger leaking into his words, but Naruto just gave an animalistic grin. Yes, you should have, Naruto said as he held out his hand and began to absorb everything that made Vato, but you didn't, he finished. My master, is it finished? Asked a woman, who was kneeling behind Naruto with his gaze directed at the ground. With the savage grin still on his face, Naruto turned around and looked down at the woman. She was dressed in a garb worn by most Fire Nation soldiers but more fitting for a female, and it looked to be made of a higher grade metal. Her long black hair was tied up in a bun, with two bangs framing her face, and a small Fire Nation headpiece that no doubt belonged to the royal family. Finally, and most importantly, her yellow-brown eyes floating in a sea of black. Yes, my dear Azula, it's done. Naruto spoke as a clawed finger dipped under her chin and forced her to look at him. But what of the Earth Kingdom Master? Sozin's comet is only days away, we can burn it all to the ground. Azula said, her eyes widening in excitement at such thoughts but returned to normal when Naruto didn't do the same. Naruto continued to look at the, much more developed, 15-year-old girl in front of him before surrendering himself to his dark desires. Despite the fact that they were out in an open field, which was still on fire from the previous battle Naruto had with Vato, Naruto claimed Azula's lips in a searing kiss. His hands moved with a mind of their own, exploring every corner of her body before finding a resting place on her well-toned rear end. Naruto's touch alone lit up Azula's mind like a blazing forest fire. His kiss burned with enough passion to drown her in, and all she could do was submit to this beast that had claimed her. Azula moaned as Naruto's tongue worked unholy magic inside her mouth, to the point she believed her bones would melt away. Black fire formed on one of Naruto's dagger-like fingertips and, the next thing Azula knew, a sudden wave of pain shot up from the base of her spine. She knew Naruto would never mark her flesh, well permanently, because he desired her flawless complexion. Azula's thoughts were once again interrupted by the sudden absence of Naruto's tongue in her mouth and it being moved to the sweet spot on her neck. Naruto could feel her legs nearly give out when his burning kiss marked her neck and grinned even more when he saw Azula's eyes nearly roll into the back of her head. His sharp teeth bit into her neck with such force that the skin broke and a small amount of her blood slipped onto his exploring tongue, but still Azula moaned. However, the shocking part to most was that when Naruto pulled away, Azula's fresh wound seemed to just stitch itself back together. Can you feel it? Can you feel yourself drowning in your own want? Naruto asked, whispering into her ear like the devil, and it made her heart race even faster. Azula's entire body was practically glowing from the fire around them, and soon they both found themselves on the ground. Azula had somehow managed to get herself on top of Naruto while the animalistic blonde used his fire to burn away her armor. The black fire melted away, turning into liquid hot metal, but the burning of it against her skin just made Azula hungry for more. More, Azula begged, her sharp fingernails digging into his scalp as she tried to make him kiss her more. Naruto found it to be a game, making Azula beg, and it was always a challenge to find new ways of doing so. She apparently couldn't really tell the difference between pain and pleasure, thought that may have been his doing, and because of this she loved it when Naruto was rough. The way his claws would rake up her back, making her shiver and moan, or when he kissed her with so much force that the stone cracked. Beg for it, he demanded. Please, she whimpered, feeling the area in between her legs warm to the heat of the sun. Plead for it, he was the devil and she loved it. Master, please. She all but screamed as one of his fingers finding its way inside her folds and made it even hotter. Not good enough, Naruto seductively whispered, knowing that it was tormenting her to no end. Please master, I'll do anything for you, she cried, not being able to stand it for a moment longer. I guess that's good enough, Naruto said before he flipped them over while removing his single finger from her folds. Azula was about to protest the lack of action but was cut off by the feeling of something very large, penetrating her most intimate area. All 9.5 inches. The moment Naruto entered Azula's warmth, said girl found her nails actually digging into the dirt while her eyes widened and her mouth hung open in a silent scream. It felt like someone had not only lit her body on fire but had also somehow lit her insides on fire as well. Azula didn't know when Naruto began thrusting into her, with force that would break a normal human, but at the moment she didn't care. Faster, she begged. Harder, she cried. Deeper. She wanted more. She wanted him to claim her for the rest of eternity. She wanted to burn like this until the end of everything, and she wanted even more than that. So Azula flipped them back over, making sure his rod never left the warmth of her body, and proceeded to ride him at an intense pace. The more pleasure she felt, the deeper her nails sunk into his chest and the more he made her burn. For over 2 hours, they continued to indulge each other until finally they released. What Naruto found amusing was that when Azula finally did gain her release, she had let blue fire shoot out of her mouth. All this Naruto saw in his dreams. He had watched every second of it and he was scared for the first time in years. What had scared him even more was when this animalistic perversion of himself looked up at him and said only 3 simple words. "See you soon." Real world. Naruto shot up with the feeling that he had just been struck by lightning. His entire body was covered in sweat. Toph was still holding onto him, and everyone else was asleep. What the fuck? Can someone please explain to me how we went from a nice grassy area to a desert? Asked Naruto as Appa landed in a small desert town, somewhere in the Earth Kingdom. We have a 100-year-old map, was Sokka's response to Naruto as he climbed out of Appa's saddle and landed roughly on the hot sand. Naruto let a soft sigh escape his lips as he helped Toph to the ground so they could get this little vacation over with. It's not that Naruto didn't want to take a break, because he could really use one, but he didn't like the idea of Toph's vision being so limited. Because of the loose sand, Toph wouldn't be able to see as clearly and her range would be cut in half. So, for now, he would have to act as her eyes until they could find some more solid ground. As they walked into what appeared to be a local bar, Naruto found himself on the receiving end of a sand-bender glare. How dare that human think he is superior to you? Destroy him! A voice roared in Naruto's head, but Naruto just blocked it out and kept walking. Yay, this place is just lovely, Naruto said, sarcasm lacing his voice, as he observed the crappy conditions of the bar. Oh, it's not that bad, said a young, blonde-haired woman sitting in a corner booth. This teenage girl looked to be 15 to 16 years old but had a look about her that told Naruto she was stronger than she appeared. The girl had her blonde hair tied up into 4 ponytails, she wore garb traditional for desert dwellers, and she also had a pair of loose goggles hanging around her neck. Naruto felt that he had seen her before. Do I know you? Naruto asked as he walked closer to the booth, but the teenager just gave him a grin. I think I'd remember seeing another blonde, was the girl's response as she took another sip of her drink. Naruto was now starting to feel as if he had seen this girl somewhere before but he just couldn't remember. Hey Naruto, who you talking to? Asked Katara as she walked over to him, making him look away from the blonde girl, but when he looked back the mysterious girl was gone. I thought I saw someone for a moment, can we leave now? Naruto asked, feeling that they should leave this desert as soon as possible, before something bad happened and forced them into an unpleasant situation. No, we're going to enjoy ourselves a little. Why do you want to leave so badly? Asked Katara, her tone becoming slightly mother-like. I want to leave for Toph's sake, being on sand severely limits her, sigh, and she is reminded of her blindness. Or have you forgotten that she really is a blind earthbender? Asked Naruto, his eyes narrowing slightly at the waterbender. Yeah, I guess I did. It's hard to remember that she's blind when she always seems to know where she's going, answered Katara, mentally slapping herself. Toph's too proud to admit it, but her blindness still affects her even though she can see by the vibrations in the ground, said Naruto, only for Aang to call both benders over to meet someone. Naruto, this is Professor Zay, head of the anthropology department at Ba Sing Se University. We've decided to help him find a massive library out in the desert, said Aang, to which Naruto just blinked. Do you even hear the words that come out of your mouth? Asked Naruto. What do you mean? Some guy, no offense professor, just tells out about an ancient library in a deadly desert and you just decide to help him. Am I really the only one who sees the failure in logic here? Asked Naruto. Actually it was Sokka's idea, said Toph as she drank one of the bar's fruit beverages. Okay, now it makes more sense. Sokka, same question I just asked Aang, Naruto said without missing a beat. Well, we need a map of the Fire Nation and what better place to get one than a library, said Sokka, wanting to defend his line of thinking. So we would swap a 100-year-old map of the Earth Kingdom For a possibly 200-year-old map of the Fire Nation? Yes, that makes a lot of sense, said Naruto as he rolled his eyes. Well, either way, I still said we would help him, so you can come with us or wait here for us to get back, said Aang, his face becoming serious because Naruto's negative attitude was getting on his nerves. Kill the Avatar. He has no right to speak to you like that, the dark voice said, urging Naruto to shove his sword through Aang's chest. Fine, but let's, at least, resupply just in case we get stuck out there for a few days. 2 hours later. Once again, failure of logic, said Naruto, while he tried his best to protect himself from the sun by using a blanket from one of their sacks. I'm starting to believe you, Toph agreed as she got under the blanket, with Naruto, and tried to cool off. Well, it's a big library, how hard can it be to find? Asked Katara while she looked over a rough sketch of what the library should look like. You know, some say it doesn't even exist, said Zay, making Naruto's eye twitch. Shouldn't you have mentioned that before? Asked Toph, who was practically voicing Naruto's irritation by the tone in her voice. Several more hours passed and Naruto was half tempted to just throw Sokka off of Appa, for getting them into this mess. Honestly, if there was a massive library in the middle of a desert, then someone would have found it by now. Either that or the building was completely submerged in sand and the only way to find it would be digging up the entire desert. Wait a moment, why didn't I think of this before? Naruto asked himself, now half tempted to slap himself for his own slow thinking. Aang, Landis, I have an idea, said Naruto before Aang directed Appa to one of the many sand dunes. So what's your great idea? Asked Sokka, who was clearly taunting him. Well, no fool would build a building on something as loose as sand, which means that the only way to find this library would be to dig up the entire desert. Or me and Aang can move the sand and allow Toph to use her sight to find it for us, said Naruto, feeling rather proud of his ingenious idea. But what if the vibrations do go far enough and she doesn't see it? Asked Katara, bringing up a valid point. Well, then we'll just have to make a very large impact, stated Naruto, knowing that he was going to hate this next part. And how are we going to do that? Asked Sokka. I'm going to jump off of Appa while he's 100 feet up. What? 5 minutes later? That's a long way down, said Sokka, who had taken the responsibility of flying Naruto up to his impending doom. Sokka, shut up, said Naruto before he took a deep breath and allowed himself to fall out of Appa's saddle. Oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, oh my back, Naruto groaned as he lifted himself off whatever he had landed on. Upon finally getting up, Naruto found himself in what appeared to be a library which was buried underground. Naruto also found that the thing in which broke his fall was actually a giant owl of some kind. Just to be on the safe side, Naruto poked the owl and got a groan of pain from the creature. Therefore, Naruto concluded that he was either still passed out or that this was the library they were looking for, and he somehow knocked out the spirit in which managed the massive library. Hey Naruto, you alright down there? Asked Aang, from the hole in the roof that Naruto caused with his body, while Naruto looked around. Yay, I'm fine, but you guys may want to come down here. Naruto called back, no longer caring about the possibly injured spirit or the fact that his own insane idea found a long-lost library, full of possibly billions of books. Naruto took a moment to browse through the nearest bookshelf and found that they appeared to be in the fiction section of the library. This meant that, as long as the spirit was knocked out, they would have as much time as they needed to learn anything they could ever want to learn. Sokka and Katara could learn more about their people and fighting styles. Aang could learn about past avatars. Naruto could help Toph with new earth-bending fighting styles, and Naruto himself might be able to find the answers to his strange dreams. So, what were you saying about stupid things? Asked Sokka, with a very smug grin on his face. Oh, shut up. What's with the giant owl? Asked Katara, who had poked the spirit just as Naruto had. Well, I'd say he was the spirit that created this place, judging by all the owl sculptures, and I apparently landed on him when I came through the ceiling, said Naruto, no longer caring about the owl spirit, as he pulled a book off one of the shelves and glanced through it for a moment. Wait, you just fell over 100 feet and now you're just shaking it off like it's nothing? Asked Katara as she pulled some water from her pouch to heal any injuries Naruto might have. You say that like you think I'm normal. Haven't you noticed that most earthbenders can break boulders with their heads? We're very durable, Naruto said before he began to walk away from the group, hoping to find some answers while in such a large library. Hey, where are you going? Asked Aang. Largest library ever created. I want to learn new things, and so I won't be staying in the fiction section. Besides, wouldn't you want to learn about all the past avatars, if you had the chance? Asked Naruto as he continued walking, while hoping to find some form of map for this place. He's right, plus we still need any information we can get on the Fire Nation, and it wouldn't hurt to maybe find a way for Aang to control the avatar state. Sokka agreed, now earning looks from both Aang and Katara. You really think we can find all that information here? Asked Katara, doubt in her voice. 3 words, my dear sister. Biggest library ever, Sokka screamed, before taking off down the hall like a madman on a sugar rush. So what am I going to do? Asked Toph, who was standing by the hole in the ceiling. Well, I'm sure I can find some earth-bending scrolls and read them to you, Katara offered. Why not? With Naruto, you should kill them, all of them. It would be so easy to just end their unimportant lives. First, you would start with the avatar, stabbing him in the back while watching the life slowly leave his gray eyes. Stabbing your blade right next to his heart before reaching in and pulling it out for him to see, just before he dies. Then that annoying water tribe boy, we could decapitate him with his own boomerang before dumping his body over the railing, the dark voice whispered, in Naruto's mind, while Naruto did his best to ignore it. Oh, then that little water tribe girl, such delicious looking skin, you could skin her alive. Make her watch as her natural beauty is, literally, stripped from her before plucking her eyes from her skull and finally ending her life. The voice cooed, but Naruto still tried to focus on finding his answers. It was all he could do to prevent his anger from making him snap. Shut up, Naruto growled, his patience reaching its limit. And finally we come to dear sweet Toph. Oh, the things you could do to her, and the things she would want us to do to her. Maybe you could keep her as a little pet. You could train her to be a good little girl. Don't you think she would enjoy that? The voice asked, and Naruto finally snapped. Enough, Naruto roared, the very ground shaking from his outburst. Hee, I see you still have a temper, Naruto, a voice called as an image of a young girl, moved just outside Naruto's vision. Who's there? Asked Naruto, trying to find them with his earth bending, but he came up empty. No matter how much you change, there will always be a bit of the old Naruto in you somewhere, the feminine voice said again, but this time from just down the hall. Naruto took off after the mysterious woman, but every time he thought he was getting close, the woman would suddenly appear far out of his reach. He spent a good 10 minutes trying to chase whoever knew his name, but, the way she was moving around, she appeared to be leading him somewhere. Naruto hated being led on like a lost child, but still, if this got him the answers he needed, then he would be willing to play along. Catch me if you can, the girl called as she skipped around a corner. Oi, get back here, Naruto yelled as he rounded the same corner, only to see her run between 2 of the bookcases. You're so slow, you'll never catch me at that pace, she taunted, rounding another corner. Hey, Naruto called, trying to push his legs faster. Naruto finally rounded the same corner, only to have a book connect with his face. Naruto growled before he noticed the girl standing on the stone railing, to a droop that would no doubt kill her. Naruto called out to her, trying to get to her before she fell, only for the girl to stick her tongue out at him. Come and get me, she yelled, before jumping off the railing. Oh crap, Naruto yelled before using his momentum to vault over the railing and hope he can catch her before it's too late. Naruto was surprised to see a walkway a few yards below him, and, on the far side of the walkway, the girl stood with a large grin on her face. It was moments like this that Naruto wondered if he was losing his mind. Once his feet touched the ground, Naruto rolled before continuing his little chase. How the hell was a girl outrunning him, and how, in the name of the spirits, was she able to survive that fall without hurting herself? Haha, your face looked funny when you jumped down here, the girl teased before she jumped up and began to run across the tops of the bookcases. What is with this girl? Naruto thought, while trying to keep a visual on her so he doesn't lose her. Finally, the girl seemed to stop and Naruto actually managed to get a good look at her. She stood at about 4 foot 3 inches, making her slightly shorter than Toph. She has dark brown hair with long parted bangs with a single lock of hair falling into her face. Her eyes were also completely white, making almost anyone believe she was blind. She wore a sleeveless, V-neck shirt with mesh armor underneath and blue shorts with matching blue sandals. Who are you? Naruto asked, but the girl just smiled at him. Get away from her, The voice roared in Naruto's head, making Naruto clutch his head in pain and fall to the ground. "Now I think that's enough yelling," said another voice from behind Naruto, but when the blonde earthbender turned, a fist slammed into his stomach and everything went black. Back with the rest of the group. "Aang, you need to see this," yelled Sokka, whose sudden shout made everyone jump. "What, Sokka?" asked Katara, with a mild glare. "I found Naruto's picture in a book." Sokka yelled in excitement. "That's it?" asked Toph. "No, you don't get it. I found Naruto's picture in a book, where he is standing next to Avatar Kyoshi." Sokka yelled, as he showed them a picture of a much 20-year-old Naruto standing next to an 18-year-old looking Avatar Kyoshi. The strange thing was that on Naruto's forehead were the traditional airbender tattoos, but that should be impossible. "What?" the three benders yelled. Well, Toph couldn't really see the picture, but Sokka wasn't lying about it either. Back with Naruto. What hit me?" Naruto asked himself, as he sat up, only to find himself in a completely white room. "It's time you learned the truth," that was the voice of the person who knocked him out. "What?" Naruto asked, before his vision was consumed by an even brighter light. "Roughly 10,000 years ago. You will not claim him." The massive fox roared, as it slammed one of its many tails down on the unsuspecting Vaatu. "Ha ha 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 ha. You allowed me to mix my energy with your own. Your power is mine." Vaatu roared, victory nearly in his grasp, only for strange chains to erupt from the ground and impale the spirit of everything dark. "Not today," yelled a new voice, before a massive blue ball of energy slammed into Vaatu and tore him apart. "Naruto, I was wondering when you would arrive," the fox said, as the same human Vaatu was trying to corrupt landed on the beast's head. This Naruto stood at around 6'3" with the muscle appearance that any man would die for. Naruto wore a pair of dark blue shinobi pant, match blue sandals, a burnt orange long-sleeve shirt, and a long red coat, with black flames at the bottom. His hair was much shorter than the earthbending Naruto's, but he still had the same enthusiastic look in his bright blue eyes. "What, the big bad Kurama getting lazy in his old age?" teased Naruto. "Arrogant brat," Kurama grumbled before a blast of purple energy slammed into his side, actually catching him off guard for once. "I will not stand for such humiliation." Vaatu roared, his entire body giving off an ominous, dark purple glow. "Come on Kurama, let's take this guy down." "How could that be Naruto? It's not possible," said Katara as she stared at the picture of an airbender Naruto and a young avatar Kyoshi. "Well, apparently it is, but just look at Kyoshi. When we saw other pictures of her, she always looked so serious and unhappy, but here she looks really happy," said Sokka, and, true enough, Avatar Kyoshi had a big smile on her face as she stood next to the past Naruto. "So what does it say about the?" asked Toph, seeing as she couldn't read the book herself. "Well, it starts on the day that his picture was made. 294 BSC. Kyoshi Island." "Alright, all finished," yelled the elderly man who had spent the last hour painting the avatar and her airbending friend. "Finally, my feet were starting to get tired from standing here for so long," Naruto whined, only for Kyoshi to punch him, lightly, in the arm. "Oh man up, if I can learn airbending then you can keep your feet on the ground for a few hours," said the young avatar, a happy smile on her makeup-covered face and mischief in dark green eyes. "But you know I like being up in the clouds," Naruto said, as Kyoshi looped her arms around the blonde airbender's right arm and rested her head up against his shoulder, as they walked away with the painting. "Yay, and I like you down to earth, where I can reach you," said Kyoshi, as they walked through her home village towards her house at the top of the hill. All around them the villagers pointed and smiled at the opposite benders, often commenting on how funny it was that Naruto managed to wiggle his way into Kyoshi's stone heart. They all knew that the moment Kyoshi found out she was the avatar she began to grow distant, and many feared she would remain alone for the rest of her life. Then, after leaving to master airbending, she returned with a blonde-haired airbender, which was strange because blonde was such a rare hair color, and with a happy smile on her face. Despite how different their cultures, bending, and, sometimes even, personalities, they both never stopped smiling. From what they had found out, from Kyoshi's parents, Naruto and Kyoshi had started off on the wrong foot. She had been cold and aggressive, even more so when airbending didn't come as natural as the other elements, while Naruto had been patient and understanding. He had walked every step with her, even teaching her how to use a glider properly, and had never lost his temper when Kyoshi had. "You know, I overheard some of the village girls saying that you taught me how to airbend by pushing me off the temple over and over, until I learned," said Kyoshi, earning a chuckle from the blonde. "Perhaps I should tell them that I only did that after you got the basics down. Although it was rather funny watching you try to move through the airbending gates. It took you 2 months to get it down," Naruto laughed, making Kyoshi blush in embarrassment before pinching Naruto's cheek rather hard. "Oh ha ha, I'd like to see you smash a boulder with your head, Mr. Smarty Pants," said Kyoshi as Naruto whined in pain. "Ah okay, no need to be so mean," said Naruto as Kyoshi released her grip on his cheek before softly kissing it. "Oh but I can also be very nice," she said, grinning up at him as they arrived at the beach. "You know, we have a few hours before your mother makes dinner," said Naruto, as he turned and wrapped his arms around Kyoshi's waist. "What are you suggesting?" asked Kyoshi, who already thought she knew what he meant. Naruto leaned in close, at an agonizingly slow pace, clearly meaning to steal a kiss from the young avatar. Well, at least she thought he was until her hair suddenly fell in her face and Naruto jumped away laughing. Kyoshi parted her hair to find Naruto holding her fan-shaped metal headdress. "Catch me if you can," Naruto yelled before taking off down the beach, leaving a momentarily stunned Kyoshi. Then everything finally clicked together and Kyoshi yelled, "Naruto! Get back here," before taking off after him. Seeing the angry avatar after him, Naruto began to push air currents under his feet and appeared to be skating across the sand. Kyoshi, on the other hand, wasn't as subtle and instead used earth bending to charge after the blonde. Seeing no way to outrun her on land, Naruto then made a quick turn and began to glide across the water. Kyoshi flung herself from the rock she was riding and water bended the ocean water into an iceboard. She then used a mixture of both water bending and air bending to catch up to Naruto. As they neared shore, Kyoshi knew he would still be able to keep going, and she would have to change to earth bending, so she instead threw herself at Naruto. It was almost humiliating for Naruto to be blindsided like he was, but it was just too much fun rolling around on the sand, wrestling with Kyoshi over the headdress. It was fun to just roll around in the sand and finally, after 30 minutes of rolling around, both benders lay exhausted on the beach. "You cheated," Kyoshi panted out, while she rested her head on Naruto's chest and listened to his still racing heart. "That's what everyone says when they lose," Naruto countered, and if Kyoshi wasn't so comfy, she would hit him. "You ruined my war paint," Kyoshi whined, and true enough, all her makeup had been washed away by their little game out on the water. "You look better without it, less formal and more fun," said Naruto, now that earned him a small punch to the ribs. "Are you saying I look ugly with my war paint?" Kyoshi asked in a tone only a woman can give a man. "No, I'm saying you look beautiful with it, but you look like a goddess without it," said Naruto, not a hint of shame in him. "I'm not sure whether to hit you or punch you again," Kyoshi whispered as she crawled her way up his body so her chin rested on the upper portion of his torso. "The first one seems less painful, I'd really like the second one," said Naruto with a nervous grin, making Kyoshi giggle. "You're horrible at flirting," Kyoshi giggled as she leaned in closer. "But I'm really good at kissing," whispered Naruto, their lips just about to touch. Kyoshi was dying of anticipation, all that time at the Northern Air Temple, and they had only been able to do this behind closed doors. Now, with nothing to interrupt them, she just wanted to seriously make out with him in the most perverted way possible. Nothing could ruin this moment. "Kyoshi, stop sucking the life out of your boyfriend and come wash up for dinner," Kyoshi's mother yelled from further up the beach, by her family home. "Damn it," Kyoshi screamed. So close, she whined, mentally crying because of her mother's sudden interruption of her intimate moment with Naruto. "Looks like we'll have to hold off then," Naruto teased, only for his eyes to slightly widen when Kyoshi gave him an almost desperate look. "Just a little one?" she asked, her eyes becoming big and sparkly, making Naruto wonder if this was a bending ability that all women possessed. "You're not going to take no for an answer?" asked Naruto. His response came in the form of an almost bruising kiss, not that he minded, but a little warning was nice. Kyoshi instantly deepened the kiss, knowing they only had a few minutes, before Naruto used a bit of air bending and flipped them over. Now it was Kyoshi's turn to be surprised. Naruto had never taken control when they kissed before, Normally he allowed her to be the dominate one. Now he was the one subduing her and exploring her mouth to his content. It was really exciting. Hormones are awesome, Kyoshi thought happily. I should do this more often, it's not every day she makes that kind of face, Naruto thought to himself as he pulled away, electing a wine from the avatar. That's all for now, I'm afraid, Naruto teased before giving the avatar one last innocent kiss. I'm not hungry, so we can continue, said Kyoshi as she tried to pull Naruto back into a kiss, only for her stomach to growl very loudly. Come on, you can suck the life out of me after we eat, Naruto teased, quoting Kyoshi's mom just to embarrass her more. Current time. With Sokka, Katara, Aang, and Toph. What, it can't end there? Sokka whined, finding he had reached the end of the small book. Well, if we find out who wrote the book, then maybe we could find the other half to it, suggested Aang, still finding it hard to believe that their blonde companion was somehow in the time of Avatar Kyoshi. The book is written by Avatar Kyoshi and, from the date, I'd say it was near the end of her life. So what do you guys think we should look for? Asked Katara, who had taken the book from Sokka. Maybe under Avatar Kyoshi, suggested Toph. Alright, let's go find that book, yelled Sokka, being as overdramatic as normal. Roughly 10,000 years ago. Renzoku Bijudama, Kurama roared as he launched 7 large balls of chakra at Vaatu, who was beginning to wonder just what this creature was to have so much power. Where did that little human go? Vaatu asked himself after losing sight of him while dodging Kurama's deadly attacks. Senpo. Chudama Razan Terengen. Naruto yelled, and when Vaatu turned around, he came face to face with over 100 balls of energy. He didn't have time to react. His one escape would be to rush back towards Kurama, but that would be ill-advised. Kurama, on the other hand, moved behind Vaatu and charged a large Bijudama before firing it right at Vaatu's back. It was beyond painful to be ripped into billions of pieces before being blown up in almost every possible direction. Outside Naruto's body, Vaatu had been forcefully removed from Naruto's soul, and it hadn't been a pleasant process. No, it had been the most painful thing Vaatu had ever felt since forcing his way through the barriers that separated the spiritual world from the physical world. Must get away, Vaatu groaned, having lost a good majority of his power, but, just as he was about to fly away, a massive energy hand grabbed him. Where do you think you're going? Asked the now awake Naruto as gold energy surrounded his entire body and strange black markings appeared all over his torso, arms, and legs. We're just getting started. Any luck finding Avatar Kyoshi's other book? Asked Katara, as she, Aang, and Sokka all searched through the Avatar section of the Spirit Library. Yay, but the first quarter of it looks to be all but ruined, still it could hold some more information, Sokka said as he dusted off an old black book, which looked to be about ready to fall apart. Well, what's it say? Aang asked as the group gathered around. The date says it starts a few months after the last book ended. 6 months after last entry. Kyoshi Island. Kyoshi Pav. For 3 months the Earth Kingdom has been in a state of civil war. One being the Earth King and the other being a warmonger named Chin. I can see that neither one of these men have the Earth Kingdom's interest at heart. Yet I'm afraid that if I do enter the war, I will somehow make things worse. I don't want to attract attention to my small village, but Naruto has said that as Avatar I need to bring peace and maintain it. On a side note, Naruto seems to be having nightmares lately and, when I ask him about them, he says he just misses the temple. It's been hard for him since the elder airbenders found out about our relationship and banished him. Naruto has since moved to Kyoshi Island. Normal Pav. You'll get a cold if you stay out here much longer, said Naruto, who had found Kyoshi sitting on the beach while staring up at the moon. Right now a cold is the least of my worries, but you could always keep me warm, Kyoshi flirted as Naruto wrapped a large blanket around the two of them, while she rested her head against his shoulder. Well, you're right to worry about this civil war, but don't let it consume your life. If trouble comes here, then we'll deal with it then, together, Naruto said, his tone like that of a wise airbending master. Why did you decide to stay here instead of returning to your home? Now you're no longer welcome there, said Kyoshi, having never asked that question no matter how much she may have wanted the answer. I never did agree with their philosophy of not having any earthly attachments. To me that would be the same as saying not to live. I didn't want to give you up, so they banished me, simple as that. Maybe, in time, they will change their minds and I can return, but, until then, I shall remain here, said Naruto, his eyes gaining a distant look as he spoke. Naruto, what's been bothering you lately? Kyoshi asked, and when Naruto looked at her, she was giving him a look that he couldn't refuse. In truth, I haven't been sleeping well. My dreams are filled with the sight of war long since past and creatures that are even stronger than the most powerful avatar. I dream of monsters that can blot out the sun with just their very presence and men that can summon rocks from the very heavens. It scares me to think that those kinds of beings once existed and might still exist, explained the blonde airbender, only for Kyoshi to wrestle out of the blanket and straddle his lap. Well, I have a way to solve your sleeping problem, said Kyoshi, a grin forming that put Naruto on edge. Oh, and what would that be? Naruto asked, although he had a feeling that he knew where this was going. Let's just say you won't have time to sleep for the next few days, now come entertain your wife. Kyoshi, Naruto, come quickly. Someone is attacking the village, yelled Kyoshi's mother, and, true enough, there was a large amount of smoke coming from the village. With speed unrivaled, both benders got up and shot towards the village. Both Naruto and Kyoshi were using an airbending ability, Naruto named Air Skates, to get to the village much faster than any other bending would allow. However, when they arrived they found that not one group was fighting in the village but two. Apparently, Chin's forces and the Earth King's forces had somehow dragged their skirmish all the way to the village. Now they were duking it out with almost no concern for the occupants of the village. Now that made both Kyoshi and Naruto more than ticked off, and that wasn't a healthy thing for either armies. We have to get them out of the village, said Kyoshi. We might cause some damage to the village if we try and force them out, said Naruto as he reached inside his robes and pulled out two metal objects. Buildings can be rebuilt but lives can't, was Kyoshi's response before she dove into the fray before them. While Kyoshi dealt with the forces from the ground, which she was doing magnificently, Naruto used his own air bending to spin rapidly and created an air spout. Now, being held high in the sky by his airbending, Naruto unfolded the metal objects into two gold metal fans. With all his strength, Naruto swung the two gold fans and managed to create two decent-sized tornadoes. Controlling the tornadoes with his airbending, Naruto carved both armies right down the middle while Kyoshi used her earth bending to make a wall before the two armies could continue fighting. Hurry up, Kyoshi, this isn't as easy as it looks, Naruto said to himself as he tried to keep the tornadoes strong but not let them just run wild. It also didn't help that both armies were now trying to launch rocks at him. Naruto, look out! Kyoshi screamed as a rather large chunk of earth was launching up at the blonde airbender. Luckily, Naruto was able to divert the boulder, but Kyoshi had lost concentration of her surroundings by warning Naruto. This simple distraction allowed one of Chin's earth benders to land a powerful hit on Kyoshi. Naruto saw this and was hit by a sudden surge of rage. This rage was revealed by his eyes turning completely black, along with his arrow tattoos. Holding out his hands, Naruto began to send high-pressure shockwaves at both armies. Seeing only red, Naruto dove down into the two armies and began to tear through them in a very non-airbender way. The old Naruto was gone and had been replaced by the embodiment of vengeance. Die! Naruto roared as he slammed his palm into an earthbender's chest before releasing another shockwave of wind. The result was a fist-sized hole being blown through his chest. Spinning around rapidly, Naruto began to unleash even more high-pressure shockwaves that killed those closest to him and propelled others back several feet. After 10 minutes of slaughter, both armies signaled a retreat and Naruto began to calm down. Once completely calm, Naruto walked over to a passed-out Kyoshi and gently picked her up. To think that the first time he took a life he ended up taking several, maybe that's why the Air Nation was so keen on preaching that all life was sacred. They knew how lethal airbending could be and didn't want others using it to cause harm. I'm so sorry. With Naruto. Present time. Naruto had woken up about 5 minutes ago and was greeted by a headache the size of the Fire Nation. Although he now possessed some of the answers, he had been looking for and even more knowledge than he cared to know. For instance, Naruto now knew that, under high amounts of emotional stress, he entered a state similar to that of the Avatar. In addition, the reason his elements in that state were more dangerous was because an ancient spirit once tried to fuse with him and ended up leaving behind some of its dark energy. However, he didn't know how he was reborn. Unlike the Avatar who was reincarnated, but he was always meant to influence the Avatar in some way. I now have a new hatred of my past lives. Why couldn't my life have just stayed simple? Naruto asked himself, as he stood up and took in his surroundings. Oh, I could show myself an ancient battle of epic proportion, but I'm not able to know about my past lives. My original self is such an ass, Naruto thought to himself while rubbing his head, hoping his headache would fade soon. Now how do I do that little trick? Naruto asked himself before placing his hand on a stone railing and focusing as hard as he could. Hey Naruto, what are you up to? Asked Sokka as he and Aang rounded a corner, slightly surprising the earthbender. Trying to find where you three went. I think we should leave before that spirit wakes up from that little nap I gave him, said Naruto, a smile back on his face and humor in his voice. You sure? You did hit that spirit pretty hard, so maybe he'll be out for a while longer, said Aang, only for a monstrous screech to echo through the entire library. As you were saying? Asked Naruto before all three males took off running to where the girls were and then to where the hole in the ceiling was. So much for getting a map at the Fire Nation. 5 minutes later. You humans have corrupted my library for the last time. The angry library spirit yelled as it chased after the gang, hell-bent on eating them. I told you I was sorry. Naruto yelled back while trying to stop an enraged spirit by making multiple earth walls. I don't think he cares at this point, yelled Katara. Well, maybe he wouldn't be so mad if someone hadn't stolen almost the entire section on 4 past avatars. Naruto yelled while glaring over at Sokka, who was currently running with 10 books in both his bag and hands. Just shut up and run, yelled Sokka. I won't let you escape. The spirit roared as it broke its way through the 3 earth walls and continued to chase the gang. Toph, let's collapse the ground, said Naruto before both earth benders suddenly stopped and slammed their right foot onto the ground. The result was the ground collapsing under the spirit and causing it to fall to the level below. Seeing an opportunity to get away faster, both earthbenders made a platform beneath their group and used it as a transport to get to the exit faster. Apparently the professor, you know, the one that convinced everyone to go to the ancient library, was already there waiting for them with a confused look on his face. What was that noise? He asked. Run now, talk later. The group yelled at him before stopping just below the hole. Why are we leaving? The professor asked, still greatly confused. His answer came in the response of the angry spirit suddenly blasting its way up through the ground and letting out an angry screech. Now wasting any more time, the now complete gang clumped up the rope before the earth benders sealed the ceiling shut behind them. It was also at that time the entire library seemed to just vanish into the sand, as if it hadn't have been there in the first place. So, I'm never going to another library again, said Naruto. Hey guys, where's Appa? Asked Aang, not seeing his oldest friend anywhere. As if knowing he was being talked about, Appa emerged from one of the sand dunes with a small grunt. Apparently, it had gotten too hot for the bison and so he had buried himself in sand to cool off. Can we leave now? Asked Toph. 1 week later, after finding their way out of the desert, which would have taken several days without Appa, the group managed to drop the professor off in an Earth Kingdom town. Naruto then proceeded to tell the rest of the group just what had happened to him in the library. He told them about his original self and the fight he had witnessed, although he hadn't been able to see the end. In return, they shared the books, which Sokka had stolen from the library, and so Naruto was able to learn about his past, with Avatar Kyoshi. Naruto hadn't gotten around to reading about the other avatars, if just to see if he was also a part of their lives in some way. Now they all decided to take a break by a riven so they could train and relax. Water-bending bomb, Katara yelled before jumping off a cliff and into the river, which caused water to erupt several yards into the air. Yay, couple 100-year-old books from the spirit library, just splash a little water on them, said Naruto with his right eye twitching. Katara climbed out of the water, while wringing the water out of her hair, before water-bending the water out of the book and saying, sorry about that. Sokka, what's taking so long with catching our fish? Asked Naruto, glancing over at the water tribe boy who had been trying to grab the same fish for the last 5 minutes. Oh, you think it's so easy? Then why don't you do it? Asked Sokka, to which Naruto stomped the ground and a moment later, the fist went sailing out of the river and into Naruto's hand. I hate you sometimes, said Sokka with a depressed look. Hello there fellow refugees, a voice called from up the river. There stood a man in his 30s wearing traditional Earth Kingdom garb, a traveling backpack, and two women behind him. The one woman on the right looked to be his wife, or pregnant sister, while the one on the left was most likely his daughter or much younger sister. All in all, a traditional Earth Kingdom family. "So, would you three like to join us for lunch? Sokka was just catching some fish," said Naruto, to which Sokka groaned at the jab to his pride. "Oh, that would be lovely," the pregnant woman said, a very mother-like aura around her. "Katara, would you help Sokka catch some more fish for us while me and Toph make some chairs to sit on?" asked Naruto. "What should I do?" asked Aang. "Gather some dry wood so we can cook the fish. Oh, and grab the spark rocks from Appa's saddle," said Naruto before the group went to work setting up a small campsite. After getting everything set up, the group all sat around the small fire pit and waiting for the meal to cook. Different conversations were brought up, such as where the two different groups were going, what their journeys have been like, and the teenage girl had asked if she could pet Appa. "Aang, maybe we should give them a ride to this refugee port they were talking about. It isn't that far out of our way and it wouldn't be safe for the woman to give birth out here in the wild," Naruto whispered to the airbender. "I don't know, Appa's been really tired lately and I'm not sure he would be able to carry all of us, but we could give it a try," Aang responded. "Food's done," Katara said, and, sure enough, the fish were cooked and ready to eat. 2 hours later, sure enough, the family accepted the ride, but when they reached the refugee area, they were all disgusted with the conditions the people were forced to live in. Entire families were cramped together, forced to eat almost rotten food, and most of the guards just watched these people with blank looks on their faces. Needless to say, Naruto was wondering who was worse, the Fire Nation, for destroying their lives, or the Earth Kingdom for not helping its people. "I can't believe how many people's lives have been uprooted by the Fire Nation," Katara commented while looking around at all the people. "We're all looking for a better life, safe behind the walls of Ba Sing Se," the father said, although he wasn't impressed by the conditions they would be forced to live in. "Guys, why is there a woman watching us?" asked Naruto, pointing to a female guard, while he continued to dive into the autobiography of Avatar Kyoshi. "Tickets and passports please," the female guard said with a very harsh tone. "Looks like someone woke up on the wrong side of the bed," said Naruto as he lowered the book and finally got a good look at the guard. She kind of looks like Kyoshi," Naruto thought, not really paying attention to the guard's sudden surprised look. "Lord Naruto?" There have been few situations where Naruto has been surprised, accidentally walking in one Mrs. Baifong while she was changing being one of them, but never more than at his very moment. This random female guard, who looked a lot like a younger Kyoshi, had just called him Lord Naruto before dragging him off to a secluded area, followed by the rest of the gang. It was there that Naruto learned that this girl's name was Suki and she was a Kyoshi warrior, and apparently, Naruto hadn't reached that part of Kyoshi's book yet. So Suki took it upon herself to explain just what the past Naruto had done. It all stated after the attack on Avatar Kyoshi's village, when the past you drove all the armies back. You convinced Kyoshi to train a group of non-benders so that if either of you are gone then the village would be safe. Ever since then the residents have held both you and Avatar Kyoshi in high regard, Suki explained in a very, possibly overly, respectful manner. So let me get this straight, you respect me because of something I did roughly 400 years ago as a different person? Asked Naruto, still not really believing it himself. Of course, Avatar Kyoshi said that if you were to ever appear again then it would be our duty, as Kyoshi warriors, to assist you. She wrote that you may not wish to have our loyalty without doing something to earn it but you have it nonetheless, said Suki before giving a small bow, making Naruto almost roll his eyes at how insane his life was becoming. Well, what do you guys think about all this? Asked Naruto, tilting his head to glance at the rest of the gang. It's your choice really, after all you are the one that Avatar Kyoshi left in charge of them whenever you appeared again, said Katara while Naruto's eye twitched in annoyance. I think it's really unfair that when you first meet Suki, she is all respectful but when we first meet her we nearly got killed. Complained Sokka and that got Naruto's attention. You nearly killed them? Naruto asked Suki, to which she nervously scratched the back of her head. Well, we also made Sokka wear a dress and Aang saved our village by using the unagi. Suki suddenly blurted out before covering her mouth. Suki! Sokka yelled in embarrassment. Oh man, I'm never going to let you live that down, Sokka. Toph laughed while holding her sides and falling on the floor. Sorry, I'm just really nervous. I never thought I would meet the man who drove back 2 armies almost single-handedly, said Suki, while wondering why she was suddenly acting like a fangirl when she is usually so confident. Look, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not the person who was married to Avatar Kyoshi, I'm not the man who saved your village, and I haven't earned your loyalty. I'm an earthbender, I've sworn to protect Toph Bifong with my life, and I'm currently trying to figure out how to get control of my new variation of earthbending, said Naruto, his tone showing that his patience were wearing thin. New variation? Asked Toph, voicing everyone's question. Naruto turned to one of the stone railings before simply placing his hand on it and concentrating. Naruto's eyes suddenly became pitch black, and a second later the entire stone railing was reduced to black dust. In other words, Naruto had just aged the stone till only dust remained, and even then the dust faded into nothing. I learned that back in the spirit library, more specifically from the original Naruto. He showed me a great many things, such as why I'm constantly reborn with each new avatar and what my purpose in life is, Naruto explained, a harshness to his voice that he had only used when Toph had been taken. Back with everything was so much simpler. Avatar Aang, please help us, cried someone from down on the main floor, and when the group looked down they saw it was the family they had given a ride to earlier that day. What's wrong? Aang asked before he jumped off the guard tower and landed a few feet from them. We managed to get our tickets for the boat, but when we left to get some food, someone stole all of our belongings. Please, you have to help us, the man begged, and then Aang got that look in his eye. 5 minutes later, Aang, you do know that this is how our little adventure to the spirit library began? Naruto asked as he helped the pregnant woman into Appa's saddle while Aang helped pack up their supplies. What could go wrong? Aang asked innocently, only for Naruto to smack him on the back of the head. Don't say that, it's like you're asking for something to go wrong. Naruto hissed. Like that's ever stopped something horrible from happening, said Toph with no small amount of irritation in her voice, which caught Naruto slightly off guard. Something bothering you, Toph? Naruto asked. No, was her response, but it was a lie. Aang, don't leave without us. I need to talk to Toph in private, Naruto said as he lowered himself back to the ground and motioned Toph to follow him just out of hearing range. What's been bother you, Toph? I don't know, maybe it's because you've barely spent any time with me since we began this little trip. Or maybe it's because you dumped me on the rest of the gang back in the spirit library. Or maybe it's because you've barely even spoken to me. Toph yelled, but her mouth was quickly covered by Naruto's hand. The whole point of talking in private is so that the entire world doesn't hear us, said Naruto, his tone soft compared to when he berated Aang. I don't care if they hear me, I'm mad at you. Toph screamed the moment Naruto uncovered her mouth. Then be mad at me more quietly, Naruto said, his temper beginning to flare. And what if I don't want to? Afraid to be embarrassed in front of your little, Kyoshi warrior, fan club? Well, guess what, I don't give a crap. Toph hissed as small vibrations shook around them in response to Toph's anger. What do you want me to do about it? Asked Naruto, deciding it might be a better idea to cool her off than add more fuel to the fire. I don't know, maybe do earth bending with me like we used to, or let me, at least, rest up against you. I miss when you let me fall asleep up against you. I miss when you used to lecture me for sneaking out at night to fight other earthbenders. Why can't it just be like when it was the two of us? Toph asked, actually striking a chord in Naruto's heart. Toph, we're both growing up and doing some of those things aren't as innocent as they used to be, said Naruto. To who? Other people? Since when do we care about what other people think? Since puberty. Naruto hissed quietly, with a small blush on his face that was soon mirrored on Toph's face. What? Toph shuddered, making Naruto look down with a much deeper blush than before. Toph, please don't make me explain puberty to you, Naruto begged, only for Toph to smack him on the head. I know what puberty is, you idiot. Mom explained it to me a few weeks before the avatar showed up, Toph said, now much quieter than she had been for the last 5 minutes. This just got very weird, Naruto said, once again proving he was the master of stating the obvious. No really? Toph asked, sarcasm evident in her voice. Not helping Toph. What, you think it's any easier for me to admit I've had a crush on you for the last year? Asked Toph, proving that she was the master of being blunt as a boulder. Say what? Asked Naruto. You know, for a powerful earthbender, you're very dense. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Toph, really helping the situation. Perhaps they were using too much sarcasm at this point. "Hey, are you guys coming or what?" asked Sokka, who was waiting on Appa just like everyone else. "What do you say, Toph? Want to go on a little trip, just the two of us?" asked Naruto, hoping that if she said yes then they could iron out all the wrinkles that have formed recently. "Sorry Aang, but me and Naruto are going to walk there. We'll meet you guys on the other side," said Toph, not really knowing how they would find each other, but it usually always works out in the end. Okay then, see you guys in a few days," said Aang before he signaled for Appa to take off, leaving both earthbenders standing there. "So, how do we get to Ba Sing Se?" Toph asked before Naruto let out a nervous chuckle. "I maybe forgot to look at the map to see which path to take," Naruto nervously said while Toph gave him the blind person's version of a glare. "If you weren't an earthbender I would bury you up to your neck and leave you there for a few days," said Toph, and, for a very good reason. Naruto hoped she was joking. "Aw man, they left without me," cried none other than Suki, who was now dressed in her Kyoshi warrior armor and face paint. "Oh hey Suki," Naruto greeted. "They left you guys here too?" Suki asked, surprised that she only noticed Naruto when he called her name. "Actually we were going to walk there but Mr. Forgetful here forgot to look at a map to see which direction to go," said Toph, making Naruto lower his head in depression. "Oh, well I have a map," said Suki as she pulled a rolled-up map out of her armor. "Well, since you wanted to go with them and we're heading that way, why don't you travel with us?" suggested Naruto. "Oh, I don't want to impose," said Suki, to which Toph silently agreed. "You won't impose in the slightest, in fact we could use the company, and that way we both get to where we want to go." 1 hour later. "So this is the Serpent's Pass? I thought it would be curvier, like a serpent," said Naruto as he looked at the narrow path that led them to Ba Sing Se. "We should be careful when crossing. The Fire Nation have been patrolling this area for the last couple of weeks and, rumor has it, they've been working on something massive on the other side," said Suki, and, sure enough, they could see a Fire Nation ship crossing the small body of water. "Well, I guess that's the point of walking to Ba Sing Se, instead of flying. It's more fun and you get to have some interesting adventures," said Naruto as they all began to walk up the first cliff. "You make it sound like you've done this before," said Toph. "I have actually. I made it all the way to Ba Sing Se before turning around and walking away. Just something about it made me feel like I would be wasting my time there. So, about a year later, I stumbled upon your small city and then spent the next several years being your protector. Trust me, I felt that was so much better than being trapped in a massive city," Naruto explained. "So you two knew each other before meeting the Avatar?" Suki asked, glancing at Naruto out of the corner of her eye. "Yep, Naruto here was hired by my parents to protect me and he's even the reason I'm an earthbender in the first place. He even taught me how to see," said Toph, allowing a small smile to form from those fond memories. "Wait, you're blind?" asked Suki, who was generally shocked. "You couldn't tell?" Toph asked. "Well, you seem to get around just fine and your hair covers your eyes rather well. I just thought that was your hairstyle," said Suki. "Nope, I can't see like normal people, so Naruto taught me how to see through my earth bending. He can do it too, but because he isn't blind, it's not as well tuned as my own. Still, it makes play hide and go seek almost impossible," said Toph, only to be interrupted by a massive chunk of burning rock slamming right into their path. "Fire Nation warship," Suki yelled, and, sure enough, there was a warship firing another burning rock at them. "Jump over the ledge," Naruto yelled just as the flaming rock sailed right over their heads. "Are you crazy? The fall will kill us," yelled Suki, only for Naruto to grab her by the hand before jumping over the opposite side of the cliff, followed shortly by Toph. As they slid down the side of the large cliff, Naruto was constantly trying to keep his balance and make sure Suki didn't lose hers. The whole point of jumping off the cliff was so that the warship wouldn't be able to fire at them, but Naruto was still trying to figure out how to stop them before they hit the rocky waters below. Luckily, Toph was able to earth-bend a slab of rock out of the side of the cliff for them to land on. Now all three of them stood there panting, trying to calm their racing hearts. "Told you, pant, new adventure," Naruto panted, with a grin on his face. "I think that was the most fun I've had since leaving Kyoshi Island." They had finally made it, the Serpent's Pass was now their bitch, and they had a straight shot to Ba Sing Se. It had taken a lot of earth-bending, running from Fire Nation warships, and beating the hell out of Fire Nation soldiers, but they had finally made it. given that now their cloths were all but ashes and were about ready to fall apart. Yay! First stop would to get some replacement cloths before continuing their little walk through dangerous, Fire Nation patrolled, countryside. This is what you did before you met me, Naruto. I don't see how you survived, said Toph as she collapsed on her bed, at the inn they were staying at. Oh, it's not all bad, besides at least we didn't get to the part where your cloths get so worn that you have to travel practically naked. That got me in trouble, more than once, and being chased out of a town isn't fun, Naruto said as he placed his sword next to his bed before gently laying down on the hard mattress. Well, I'm happy we don't have to walk around naked, a specific Kyoshi warrior said, having abandoned her destroyed armor before taking off her charred robes. This left her with only her undergarments on. Hey Naruto, calm down, I can hear your heart racing from here, Toph complained, unaware that Naruto had caught a glimpse of Suki's current state and had turned a deep shade of red. Yay Naruto, why's your heart racing so much? Suki teased as she placed a hand on her hips and gave him a sly grin, while feeling proud that she could make the great Lord Naruto blush like that. I'm going to sleep now, was all Naruto said before swiftly turning over to hide his face. It's only the middle of the day, maybe we could go have some fun, said Suki, with a grin still on her face. What are you suggesting? Asked Toph. Maybe a girl's day on the town. That way we can get new cloths and Naruto can rest up a bit, Suki explained as she looked down at her ruined green robes. Ah, but I'm tired, Toph whined. Alright, so we'll wait till tomorrow so we can all go. That way Naruto can carry everything, was Suki's response. Suki, I think we're going to get along just great. Naruto's mind. So, I see you've decided to come back even after I showed you the truth, said the original Naruto, who had somehow managed to stay with his earth-bending self even after leaving the spirit library. I want to know more, the more I know then the better I can protect Toph, said the current Naruto while the original gave him a grin. Follow me, I want to show you something. What? Before, you saw a version of the future where the darkness completely corrupted you. I believe you thought it was a dream, but, in reality, that was a possible outcome. I want to show you a future where you help save the world but know that every heroic action has a negative outcome. What do you mean? Naruto asked, but his twin just gave him a grim smile. Ask yourself what you would rather sacrifice, the world, or Toph. Naruto's vision. A slightly older-looking Naruto now stood in the great palace that occupied Ba Sing Se. This Naruto was dressed in a long black robe with dark green edges and rock-like gloves. He was currently standing in front of a well-dressed man, most likely the Earth King himself, along with several members of the Avatar gang off to the side. Naruto, you are the savior of this great city, the once loyal protector of the first metal bender in history, and friend of Avatar Aang. As Earth King, I wish to appoint to you the duty of being my right hand. Do you accept the responsibility of leading the Dai Li in protecting our most sacred of traditions? The Earth King asked as all of the gang smiled at him. It would be my honor, my king, Naruto said before bowing down to him on one knee with his head lowered. Then by my right as Earth King, I appoint you head of the Dai Li. With that the entire gang cheered and the Earth King gave him a kind smile. Well, I guess that since you're the new head of the Dai Li, we won't get to see as much of you anymore, Sokka teased as he put his arm around the younger man's shoulder. Sokka, we both know you can't even catch a fish without my help, Naruto teased back before a sudden saddened look appeared. I'll catch up with you guys in a while. There's someone I have to go see, was all Naruto said before leaving the, now quiet, group. It's been almost a year since it happened. Do you think he'll ever get better? Asked Katara, who was gripping Aang's hand rather tightly. Would you? Sokka asked his sister, the humor in his voice now completely gone. No, none of us have yet, said Aang, feeling grief for Naruto and what he must be going through at the moment. Naruto walked through several rings of Ba Sing Se, with people parting like he was a living god. Apparently, they had all heard of his new title and, either out of fear or respect, they moved out of his way. Naruto didn't care to notice the looks of pity he was getting, or he was just too deep in thought to realize them. Before long, Naruto found himself standing on the outermost ring, right in front of a statue of Toph herself. Toph was carved with her normal earth-bending outfit, with her head held high and that same blank look in her stone eyes. I finally made it, Toph, Naruto whispered as he placed his hand on the statue. The Earth King himself appointed me his right hand. I've also started to teach some students in the art of metal bending. We actually named the school in your honor. I know you like to have bragging rights, so now you can brag that you have one of the best bending schools named after you," he continued, unaware of the small tears forming in the corners of his eyes. "Everyone misses you, I miss you. It hasn't been the same since you died," Naruto said, his voice trembling now before he fell on his knees in front of Toph's statue. "If you were here now, you'd tell me to such it up and be a man. If you were here no, then I wouldn't be. Why did you have to be so brave? Why couldn't you have just let them end me, instead of jumping in by yourself? I thought I taught you better than that." The ground began to shake in response to Naruto's raging emotions. He felt angry for allowing her to be so reckless, he hated himself for not being able to save her, and he was sad because he would never be able to hear her again. He would never be able to hold her like before, touch her like before, kiss her like before. "Don't worry, Toph, I'll be joining you soon enough," Naruto whispered as he looked out past the statue, to what monstrosity awaited him. "Lord Naruto, we're ready to attack under command," said an earth-bending general, as he motioned to the large army just behind the outer wall. "Keep your men back. No one else is going to lose their lives today." "No one except them," Naruto said as he looked out at the combined force of the Fire Nation. Billions of Fire Nation soldiers had come to wipe out the world's last chance for reason and freedom. Billions have come to burn Ba Sing Se to the ground, and behind them all, being a coward, was the Fire Lord himself. The man who personally struck Toph down in front of him. The man who laughed as what little light left Toph's eyes. The man Naruto was going to kill with his own hands, no matter what size army he hides behind. "You're really going to do it, aren't you?" asked Aang as the rest of the group flew in on Appa. "You can't stop me, none of you can," Naruto whispered, only for Aang to place his hand on Naruto's shoulder. "We know, and, although I don't agree with it, you deserve to have your own justice," said Aang, knowing that the real Naruto had already died a year ago and that the body was just catching up. Saying goodbye would be too hard, so Naruto simply dropped to the rough ground below. There he stood, one man against the monsters of the Fire Nation, ready to face death and be set free. Therefore, he tore off his robes, revealing light Earth Kingdom battle armor. Naruto also undid his ponytail, allowing his hair to blow in the wind, before he began to walk towards his destiny. "Don't let him touch you, if he does then you're as good as dead." Naruto heard Ozai shout to his men, while Naruto went from walking to sprinting at his target. With a mighty roar, the entire Fire Nation army also began to charge at Naruto. They believed their greater numbers would stop a man such as Naruto. When the two forces collided, Naruto drove his way through the first several men before halting his charge to begin his slaughter. The first man was an easy kill. Naruto had simply placed his hand on the man's head and a moment later he was dust. With every single touch, Naruto was turning more and more men into piles of black dust. The earth-bending general stood in shock as one man tore his way through an entire army with no help. "He fights like an enraged spirit. What could cause a man to want revenge so badly that he would fight an army by himself?" the general asked. "They took away the one person he loved with all his heart. Fire Lord Ozai killed her right in front of him, and it was then that something inside of him died. Naruto spent months trying to get over her death, almost killing himself one time, but in the end he settled for revenge," Sokka explained to the no-name general, his eyes distant and his tone sharp. "Who was it?" the general asked, but all Sokka did was rest his hand on Toph's statue. The general understood. "The air nomads taught us not to care about things like death because it was just another part of life. It's only after seeing the pain Naruto has gone through that I realized they were wrong," said Aang as Naruto killed several hundred men by burying them under a mountain of boulders, or simply sinking them deep into the ground. "Die, I want all of you to die. Do you hear me? I said die," Naruto said as he crushed a man's skull, spraying blood over a few scared soldiers. By now, it had stopped being a battle and more like a slaughter. Some would try to stand their ground, only to be killed, while others began to run for their lives. Naruto was like a demon, carving his way through their ranks with a ferocity not of the mortal realm. Soon enough Naruto reached Ozai himself, the smug bastard sitting on a golden throne with a grin on his face. "Hello boy, come to die at last?" Ozai mocked as Naruto fell to one knee. By now, Naruto had several weapons sticking out of almost every limb on his body. Spears, swords, and knives all drew Naruto's blood, but it was only now that he noticed he was going to finally die. No, not before he slits Ozai's throat. If you wanted to join your girlfriend, then all you had to do was ask. As me to send you to her, beg me to release you from your own hell. Ozai continued to mock as he stood and approached Naruto, who had Toph's old space rock hidden in his clenched fist. No, no? Ozai asked. No, we won't be going to where Toph is. No, we'll be going to the underworld where all us monsters belong. I'm going to have the rest of eternity to make you suffer. Naruto roared before suddenly turning the space rock into a small dagger and stabbed Ozai right in the throat. Naruto watched as Ozai gurgled on his own blood, desperately trying to cling to what little life he had left. He wasn't supposed to die like this, it was his destiny to unite the world under the Fire Nation. Then the light left his eyes and, for the first time in a long time, Naruto stood tall. I'm coming, Toph. End vision. Naruto gasped as the vision of the future cleared, as the horror cleared. How could such a thing be possible? How could he let Toph die in the future? So now you know, the original spoke. Why did you show me that? Am I that twisted as to torture myself with visions of constant death and evil? Naruto asked only for his twin to shake his head. No, I'm allowing you to see what your current path will lead you, he spoke, while Naruto just grew even more frustrated. Speak sense, damn it. You have 3 choices as to how this story ends. 1 ending is where Toph dies and yet you live with the guilt. 2 is you die and Toph is forced to carry on a shell of her former self, the original began. And the 3rd option? Naruto asked, although almost afraid to. You leave her before you 3 reach Ba Sing Se and you both live. You break her heart but she will become strong enough to survive the rest of this war. I'll find another way, Naruto whispered. There is none, the other said as the dream world began to fade. I will find another way, you hear me? I don't care about destiny because if destiny tries to take Toph from me then I would smash it into pieces. It was a long walk to Ba Sing Se. None have ever questioned that fact, but it was only now that Naruto remembered just how long it really was. Seriously, it's ridiculous. Even Toph missed flying on Appa and she hates flying altogether. So now, all 3 members walked along a dirt road with the burning sun shining down on them. There were no trees in which to seek shade and no bodies of water in which to refill the liquids their bodies had already used up. In other words, it sucked to be them. In fact, it had gotten to the point that Naruto removed the upper portion of his robes and just let them hang around his waist, being held up by a sash. Suki had done a similar thing but she had bandages wrapped around her modest-sized chest. Sadly, the heat didn't stop her from being embarrassed. Okay, we should try finding some water before we go too much further. If we don't then I doubt we'll get very far tomorrow, said Naruto, having already been in the area once so he had a good idea as to where a source of water was. Good idea, we're almost completely out of water and our food is all but gone. We should try and find some animals to hunt as well, commented Suki, who looked around for any places animals might live or even occupy. Alright then, you and Toph go look for some water while I try and find us something to eat. We'll meet back here in about an hour and hopefully had enough supplies for another day's trip, said Naruto before he began his trip off the dirt road and into the brush that had surrounded them on both sides. So, you ready to get going? Suki asked nervously. Lead the way, princess, said Toph, hoping she could have gone with Naruto instead, mainly because her sight could have helped him find animals for them to eat. With Naruto continued to walk through the rather high, dry grass, feeling it itch his skin every time it grazed against him hand. There was currently too much grass in the area for him to use his own earth bending to look for their next meal and that meant he would have to be out there even longer, if just to find a small animal. However, Naruto's concentration was suddenly interrupted by the feeling of something utterly massive moving across the ground. Honestly, with all the vibrations it was making, the thing had to be as big as a small mountain, not to mention the much small vibrations he felt moving next to it. Just what, in the name of the spirits, could be that big? Naruto ran, faster than he thought he could, and soon enough he saw what was making such massive vibrations. A massive drill-like device, with the Fire Nation insignia on its top, that stretched for at least a mile and, traveling beside it, was practically an army of Fire Nation soldiers. It was also then that Naruto knew what their target was and it was for that reason that he couldn't allow the device to go on any further. Just the thought of how much damage that drill could do made his temper flare slightly. Damn it, how the hell am I going to stop that thing? Naruto thought, knowing full well that he wouldn't be able to take on a damn army by himself, let alone take the drill down as well. Ask for my power, a deep voice said inside Naruto's head, although it wounded nothing like Vatu's or even his originals. No, this one sounded older in a way. Just how many voices are in my head? Naruto thought, only for a sudden surge of pain to shoot through his mind. Don't you dare. You are but a copy of the original, a fake using his face for something it was never meant to be. I offer you my power because you are the closest your kind have ever gotten to the original. The voice roared, with enough power to make Naruto crumble to the ground in pain. What the fuck? Naruto hissed as he tried his best to ignore the agonizing pain. Every single one of you fakes are nothing more than a shadow of what the true Naruto was. You fakes, who can only bend a single element at a time, cannot even imagine the power the real Naruto wielded. It is only because you resemble him, more than the others, that I offer you even a fraction of my power. The voice roared again just as the pain went away, which left Naruto gasping as if he had just been held underwater. What are you? Naruto asked as he shakily stood up, as if expecting the pain to return. It doesn't matter what I am, just take my power, and save your damn species from itself, was all the voice said before a burning sensation coursed through Naruto's body, originating from his stomach. What is this? Naruto just couldn't seem to understand what was happening to him the last few weeks. Soon enough, strange dark orange energy seemed to bubble out of various points on Naruto's body. The heat he was feeling also seemed to only increase, to the point he had fallen back down and tried to get through this new pain. The strange burning energy soon covered Naruto's entire body and began to burn the ground around him. This strange power was like a poison, killing everything it touched, and it even began to burn Naruto's very skin off. Now when someone's first layer of skin is burned off, there is usually meat under it. However, for Naruto, there seemed to be a deep red energy instead. It was as if, beneath his skin, there wasn't meat but pure energy that made of his body. You should thank me, boy, the being said before Naruto's eyes snapped open, to reveal they were completely red and glowing with untold power. Slowly the rest of Naruto's skin peeled off, leaving only a creature at his place, and even his clothes seemed to vanish beneath the shroud of raw energy. Slowly the creature got up off the ground, but, instead of standing like a man, it was crouched down like an animal. Suddenly, just by the back of his spine, 5 tails of pure energy sprouted with amazing speed. This being, who had once been Naruto, stared down at the Fire Nation soldiers below with anger at its now completely white eyes, compared to the red they had been before. Then it used some of its power to leap into the sky before diving down on its unsuspecting prey. One of the strange mechanical vehicles the Fire Nation uses was the first thing the beast saw when flying through the air. So, the beast straightened its body and dove down at the vehicle with godlike speed. Now normal objects, even humans, would just bounce off the armored vehicle, but the creature pierced it like a hot knife through butter. To all the other men it just appeared as if the vehicle had stopped when there was actually a hole, still melting slightly, where the beast went through. So, as if knowing that nobody saw it, the beast's arm shot up from the very ground itself, just to grab a random soldier and drag him back down into the earth. This caught the others' attention. Too bad, it was already too late for them to do anything about it. When they all prepared to move and attack, multiple arms of red energy shot up from the ground. They didn't even have a chance to scream before being pulled down into the ground, where they would lay until they turned to dust. The remaining soldiers grouped together by the massive machine, which was meant to drill through the walls of Ba Sing Se, in the hopes they would survive whatever was attacking them. The creature, which used to be Naruto, rose up out of the ground like a demon straight from the pits of hell itself. The strange energy that made up the creature was covered in the distinct liquid known as blood, but what scared them the most was the small amount of steam that was coming out of the creature's mouth. It looked like a fierce dragon ready to burn them to a crisp, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Even the ground around the demonic creature was being heated, to the point it became lava, and yet the creature just kept staring at them as if it was deciding whether or not to kill them. Angry, the creature said, its voice raspy but still heard by the group of remaining soldiers that had yet to be killed. What? One of the soldiers asked with fear evident in his eyes. I'm so angry. The beast roared, actually unleashing a sonic boom from its mouth, before lunging at them. The first man died the quickest, with his head simply being torn off with a single slash of the beast's claws. The second man had his stomach pierced by one of the beast's 5 tails, before being flung high into the air and left to fall to his death. Next was the third man, who the beast stabbed both hands into his chest before literally ripping him in half, right down the middle. Then the fourth man, who turned out to be a firebender, tried to attack only to find his arms missing and then his head. Finally, the last man had his skull crushed by the beast's foot repeatedly smashing into his head. "Die, I want all of you to just die." The beast roared again before leaping several miles in front of the drill. Once he landed, the beast's many tails seemed to arch up towards his head and black energy began to form. The energy, coming from the beast's body itself, soon took the form of a massive ball, about the size of one of the smaller vehicles. The red monster then forced the ball to condense into about the size of an apple, before eating it in one bite. Then the body suddenly expanded to extreme measures and steam seemed to crawl its way out of his demonic mouth. Finally, after a moment of focusing the energy, the beast opened its mouth and let out a deadly beam of monstrous proportion. Even with being miles away, the beam of pure destruction hit the Fire Nation device head-on. When the smoke cleared, the massive Fire Nation drill had been blown into pieces right down the middle. In fact, some of it had been melted together and everyone inside had been vaporized. Everything had been destroyed by this beast's rage, and now, after its power fading away, only Naruto remained in its spot. Naruto's entire upper body was now covered in a strange tattoo, which looked like a language from another time altogether, but it looked as if it had been burned into his very skin. "Gah, where am I?" Naruto asked as he sat up, only to see the carnage he had caused and was rendered speechless. "What did I just do?" Naruto asked himself as he looked down at his tattooed covered chest and arms, hoping that it didn't cover his face as well, because then he couldn't hide it if he needed to. "You've rediscovered a power I had long ago," said the real Naruto, floated like a ghost above the earthbender. "I thought you were gone after I shoved your offer right up your pompous ass?" asked Naruto, while glaring up at his blonde twin. "I'm not really here. I'm actually in the spirit world, but I can only connect to you, but that's not the reason I'm here. I'm here to inform you that you must not use the darker side of your earthbending," the other Naruto said. The entire time his face remained passive without a single hint of care of his other self. "Why not? It's useful," asked Naruto, while he slowly got to his feet but never broke eye contact. "Every time you use that corrupt power, Batu gains more of a hold over you. The only reason you aren't completely warped by now is because Kurama used his power to purify your system," the older Naruto explained, only to receive a confused look from his earthbender counterpart. "The person that put me through agonizing pain was really helping me?" asked Naruto, not believing a word of it. "Yes, he did, but that's not the point. The point is that if you use that power, then you will continue to strengthen his hold over you, and this must not be. If so, then the next time you are reborn, you will be under his complete influence and there will be nothing anyone can do to stop it. Now, go about your life, we will most likely never meet again," the older Naruto said in a dismissive tone before fading away as if he had never been there at all. "Damn it, now I had to go find Toph and Suki." After regaining his sense of direction, Naruto was finally able to make it back to the meeting point, only to find both Toph and Suki not there. To think, he had even spent the extra time to actually hunt them down some food and they weren't even there to say, "thank you," or anything. So Naruto simply sat down and waiting for them to return, but hours passed and still no sign of them. It was at this point Naruto really began to wonder if anything had happened and, if just to be sure, took off running in the direction they were headed in the last time he saw them. As he ran, Naruto constantly used his earth bending to see several yards ahead in the hopes he would find something. It was only when Naruto found Toph's hairpiece that he truly began to worry about the. A few yards away, Naruto saw that several of the bushes had been burned by fire and there were multiple large rocks just scattered in almost every direction. This told him that they had, most likely, been ambushed by a group of firebenders and were taken instead of killed. Luckily, the firebenders were bad at covering their tracks because Naruto found their trail and it was rather recent. "Hold on, you two, I'm coming," Naruto whispered before he took off running again, actually ripping up the ground with each step he took. Soon enough, Naruto actually caught up with the Fire Nation soldiers who took Toph and Suki, but found it was more like a small army. It almost looked like a damn invading force and, right at the center, they had Toph and Suki in metal cells. Just seeing Toph in one of those damn cells, again, made Naruto's temper flare, but he managed to keep a relatively good lid on it. The last thing he needed was to charge a fucking army head on, considering he didn't have a death wish of any sort. "So what are you going to do?" asked an all too familiar voice. "Didn't you say we would never meet again?" asked Naruto to his lookalike. "I said we would most likely never meet again. Now, what are you going to do?" asked the original Naruto as he too looked down on the army, which was slowly marching away. "Wait till they make camp and sneak in, free the girls, and sneak out," Naruto explained, his eyes never leaving the army. "We both know that neither of them will survive the night, so you don't have much time to waste," said the original, only to receive a glare from Naruto. "If you aren't going to help, then go away," Naruto snapped, not feeling in the mood to deal with his original self. "We both know that this is what I spoke of. If you had just left, then none of this would have come to pass and you both would live," original Naruto said, his tone as dismissive as usual. "Go jump off a cliff and leave me alone. You need to go now or they will both die in only a few hours." "Fuck my life," Naruto hissed before he decided to actually believe the original, for once. To say the small army was surprised, when a teenage boy slammed into their rear ranks, was the understatement of the century. This kid seemed to just come out of thin air and just began to tear into them with vicious earth bending. When they tried to launch fire at him, the kid just seemed to summon up a rock to protect him before sending the rock at the nearest unlucky bastard. This kid was named Naruto and his target was the two girls being held near the front of the army. "They're going to overwhelm soon," said the original, who was simply walking through the fight like the ghost he was. "Then maybe you could help," Naruto whispered as he sunk 3 men into the ground before sending a boulder at 10 other. "I'm a spirit. What would you like for me to do?" asked the spirit. "Moral support would be nice right about now." Naruto yelled only to grunt in pain when the tip of a sword grazed his back, leaving a cut right across his upper back. "Shit," Naruto roared as he punched the man, who cut him, right in the face with enough power to break his face. "Take him down now," one of the higher-ranking soldiers yelled, only for Naruto to launch himself up into the sky before coming back down, with his fist hitting the ground first. The moment all of Naruto's power was released into the ground, most of the even terrain turned into a forest of spikes, with only a few soldiers surviving. For a moment, Naruto believed he would actually have a chance, until the tip of a spear shot out through his stomach. Gasping in pain, Naruto's legs gave way, but he managed to get back up and stop the attacker's heart, with a single punch to the chest. "Is that the best you could do?" Naruto asked as he yanked the spear out of his back, with blood flowing out of the corner of his mouth. Naruto charged forward, despite the hole in his body, and continued to fight like a machine. The entire time, Naruto continued to focus on getting to the other side of this ocean of enemies. He must get to Toph and Suki, he must save them, he must be Toph's protector, or he would die trying. Therefore, Naruto continued to push forward, taking down any who got in his way, but he didn't do it unscathed. By the time he actually got to the cage, which held Toph and Suki, he had a dagger sticking through his left hand, 2 swords rammed through his body, severe bleeding from multiple cuts, and was 1 breath away from a collapsed lung. What the hell is this kid?" one of the soldiers asked, as they tried to keep a threatening but large space between them. "Toph, Suki see, can you hear me?" Naruto asked, his voice raspy and tired. "Naruto," both girls exclaimed, not aware of Naruto's current condition. "Toph, I need you to get out of that cage and then help Suki get out of hers," said Naruto, knowing he could barely stand, let alone get them free while protecting them. "I can't bend metal, we need a key," said Toph, who now knew something was wrong by the sound of Naruto's heart. "Toph, listen to me, you need to bend your way out," said Naruto as one of the braver soldiers charged him, only to be sent flying into the air via a chunk of rock. "I'll trying," she whispered before the sound of her tiny fists hitting the metal was heard. Over and over, Toph continued to hit the metal, trying to find something she could bend. With one final hit, Toph finally saw the impure chunks of rock still in the metal, and then she hit it again. Being able to see the rock, Toph managed to tear out of the metal cage like a wet paper bag, and she saw everything around her. "Oh crap," she whispered, now knowing why Naruto wanted her to hurry up. "She should hurry, they're getting ready to charge again," original Naruto said, having overheard the soldiers talking and issuing orders. "Toph, get Suki and run." Naruto yelled but Toph didn't move. Toph! Naruto yelled, much louder than before, actually snapping Toph out of her shock. A few moments later both Suki and Toph were out of their cages and Suki actually saw what Naruto's current condition was. By the spirits, the Kyoshi warrior whispered, not even sure how Naruto was even still alive let alone fighting. Suki, take Toph and run. I'll hold them off, Naruto whispered as he noticed what remained of the army begin to march forward, one step at a time. Naruto, Suki whispered, realizing what was about to happen. Go, I'll catch up as soon as I can, Naruto said, while taking one last look at Toph, his last look at Toph. No, Toph whispered, but before she could take even a single step, Suki actually picked her up and began to run as fast as her legs could carry them. No, she yelled, but it never reached Naruto's ears, mainly because of the war cry of the Fire Nation army. Sorry Toph, but it looks like I won't get to tell you, I love you, after all. Get strong Toph, never give up, said Naruto, with an unusually calm look in his eyes, as the army charged him. We'll keep you alive as long as we can, said the original as he placed his hand on Naruto's shoulder. We? Naruto asked, as he got ready for his last fight. I guess you aren't all bad, for a copy, said Kurama before Naruto felt a sudden burst of energy, shot through his entire body. Use this power well, you'll only have it for 15 minutes at most, said the original before he faded away into nothing. Still an ass, I say. Alright, come on you bastards. I'll take you all on. Naruto roared, with the will of fire shining in his eyes, before he ripped one of the swords out of his back and charged forward again. With a swing of his last good arm, Naruto cut clean through the first man and lost the blade in the second. He managed to maneuver his way through the firebenders, spears, and sword, right into the heart of the remaining Fire Nation soldiers. His right leg slammed into the ground, launching up a large slab of rock, before picking it up with his good right arm. Naruto then began to slam that large slab of rock into any and every enemy that came into his range. Come on, is that the best you can do? Asked Naruto as the slab of rock finally broke, but he still kept moving. Along the way, Naruto's right arm was almost completely cut off at the elbow, but Naruto could hardly feel the skin being cut or his muscles being ripped. All he could think of was him and Toph back in the good old days. Back when they played in the gardens and trained with their earth bending, or even when he would watch her all night, if just to make sure she actually fell asleep. These happy memories allowed him to survive a spear to his already damaged left arm and when his back was lit on fire by a firebender. Then a scene flashed before Naruto's eyes. Scene begin. I'm so scared. I am lost. Where am I? She asked, but it sounded more like a plea for help, as Naruto moved his fingers through her black locks. You're safe. The earth around you will always protect its children. Believe it, Toph. Wherever there is earth, she will protect you if you allow it, whispered Naruto, who could feel Toph's breathing calming down and her tears slowly stopped. How can it protect me? It's not alive, she asked, her confusion muffling her grief for the moment. Of course she is. Everything around you is alive and willing to protect you if you know how to ask. Toph, would you like to know how to ask for her help? Naruto inquired. Toph pulled away and turned her face towards his voice, looking up to him, dried tears now all that remained of her former mood. The strong, yet still fragile child nodded with a smile on her young face, and Naruto, in turn, wiped away her dried tears. Then come and I will teach you. Scene end. Please, Mother Earth, give me enough strength to hold them off for just a little bit longer, whispered Naruto as he dodged a spear, which was thrust at his face. Naruto could feel it. He only had a little of Kurama's energy left, and this damn army was still big enough to go after Toph and Suki. What he needed was a way to take the most of them out with a single attack, but he didn't know what he should do. That's the moment that a sword pierced through his back and came dangerously close to his heat. Grunting in agonizing pain, Naruto used his head to earth bend and made the ground eat the man up like he was a snack. That's also when Naruto got the last bad idea he would ever have. Alright, one last attack, whispered Naruto before he launched himself up into the air, for the last time, and came down with the power of a god. When Naruto hit the ground, hundreds of spikes shot up in every direction. Some of the soldiers tried to run, but they were pierced by, at least, one spike each. This small patch of earth, which was once a farming area, had become a mass slaughter with Naruto at the very center. With no more energy left, Naruto simply lay under the sun and stared up at the clouds passing by. He had never really taken the time to notice how calming it was to just stare up at clouds. Even here, as he slowly bled to death, Naruto couldn't help but imagine how strong his Toph would become. He could see it, she would become the greatest earthbender in the world and he couldn't be more proud. "Stay strong, Toph," Naruto whispered just before the life left his bright blue eyes. "The true measure of a man is not how he lives but how he dies. You died protecting the one person who meant the world to you and I respect you for that. However, your tale is not yet complete, you still have a few people left to help before you can truly pass on," said the original Naruto as his hand phased into the dead teenager's body and pulled out a small blue ball of energy. "You should thank me, I'm going to let you truly say goodbye to them."